Okay, Rabbi, welcome to the first session of our Smicha program. So this, just in terms of Zoom, I suppose everybody has become proficient in Zoom already, but you can always modify your viewing settings if you wish. I'll be sharing my screen a number of times through the session. In fact, I think I'll do so right now, just to show the syllabus. I assume everybody has already received this by email. If you haven't, then you can put your email in the chat and we'll make sure we get it to you. And there might be some changes, not guaranteed. Some things might come up, but it was designed in such a way that when it comes busy times, for example, next Wednesday night is Purim. We want to stick to Wednesday nights as much as possible. And then people get busy with Pesach, just to give everybody plenty of time to get on board and make sure you're with the program and so on and so forth. So we really only have 2 shiurim between now and Pesach, and we'll start right after Pesach. This is called meeting number 1 because the ultimate in the Limud HaTorah is Bittul. No, that's not the way. Because this is before we're actually starting the Shulchan Aruch itself. So you received a sample PDF of this kavitz, which Mirza Hashem, everybody will receive by mail, as I understand. But that first lesson we're going to be learning in 2 weeks from now, which is Sim Pei Zayin, Sif Aleph through Dalet. So Sim Pei Zayin goes through 3 weeks, and each shiur we hope to keep up with this pace. And as you see, so Bosor B'chalav is 16 sessions, and then you have basically Chedesh Tishrei also to do Chazara, just El, because the Mivchan is Chafei El for Bosor B'chalav, and then start Tarubas beginning of Chedesh Cheshvan, and that's also 16 shiurim, and again Chazara, and then about a year from now is the Faher on Tarubas. And they finish over here. I'm not sure why the schedule was made this way, but in any case, you have 5 sessions on Melicha, and that will finish about Lag B'Omer time, and then we'll have the Bechina right after that. So that's the general schedule, the general overview. And like I said, if you need a copy of that, you can just put your email in the chat, and I'll make sure that you get that. So now we'll get to work here with tonight's session. Let's just get everything properly on the screen. Okay, so this is shiur number 1. This is the Hakdoma to Bosor B'chalav. And if we have time, we'll get to the beginning, at least maybe Sif Aleph, maybe of some Pei Zayin. Some of you had asked about what to prepare, but seeing that it was scheduled for basically a Hakdoma Klolis, so therefore it was left like this without preparation. This is the booklet we spoke about. The basic info, I'm just, sorry, I have to take this off. So I don't know how many of you were here. I see some names that were here last week, and I see some names that were so we gave some basic info about the course, and we spoke about this in the past about halacha l'maisa, and even if you have smicha already, as far as the time. So for some reason, the misgeras of this shiurim is set for 2.5 hours. We know that that's a very, very long time to listen, and we will have a break around halfway through. So that's approximately an hour and 50 minutes, which would be around 8:15 Eastern time, 7:70 time, Montreal time, whoever it is. And in the future, some of you expressed about different time zones and the difficulty of this time. So I'm leaving it to the Chavre and Havineni, who are accustomed to doing that and actually have people all over the world taking shiurim at the same time. All the shiurim and Mirza Hashem will be recorded, and you'll have access to them and be able to go back to them. So if it happened, the person needed to leave in the middle for a few minutes, or was unable to pay attention for the whole time, you want to go over something, so those will be available, and you could always speed it up if you want to double the speed or something like that. And those will be available basically, I think, until the end of the entire program. As I mentioned, we're learning Bosor B'Cholav, Taruvas, and Malicha, and the recordings, as I said, will be available. And the Bechin, as I mentioned, will be from Bezdin Rabbanim Chabad, who are the ones that are sort of Omed al Gabav of this whole inyan. Okay, so today the Hakdoma Klaus, I want to cover a few things. Everybody probably is familiar with this chart that has, in at least the old Sidurim used to have this Teira Tzivalon Mesha with the basic Meseira from Har Sinai all the way down to the Shulchan Aruch. I would like to just put a sort of a general outline on this that I've mentioned many times about how Sefer Yetzirah is organized around the inyan of Elam Shana Nefesh, Rosh Tevis Oshan. Elam is space, Shana is time, and Nefesh, of course, is Nefoshes. So you have, when it comes to halacha, we have the inyan of place, and we'll see very, very stark contrast between many of the psakim from the Bnei Ashkenaz and the Bnei Sfard, and how the minhagim developed in different places somewhat differently, which is the idea of Elam. And then we have Shana, how things change throughout time, not change chas v'shalom, but developed, ishtalshus halacha. And then we have the inyan of Nefesh, the various important figures, and to understand their sequence, to know the exact years and things of this sort is not primary importance. Even remembering every last name is not of primary importance, but to understand the general relationship between the Rishonim and Achreinim, and within the Rishonim themselves, to understand their relationship and how this is reflected in the Svarim that we use today as our guides. So therefore, when you're looking at a Pesach and you see that something is from the Trumas Adeshin and something is from the Kresu Plesi, to know how they are situated and what's the significance of their psak. So it's important to have some general idea of the major figures, and we're not talking about hundreds of names, we're talking about limited number of names, and we'll categorize them in general. And as we go through the Chaimer, we'll hopefully review them to put them in their general sequence. So just in general over here, we'll look more in a more detailed way at this. We have Tanakh, the Teira Shebeksav, and then we have the various Pirushim of the Teira Shebal Peh, mainly from the Tanoim, the generation of the Mishnah. So we have over here the Mishnah, but above the Mishnah, you see you have Sifra and Sifri on the various, traced back to the various, which one of the Chamoshim they apply to, Mechilta, and you have Midrashim that have Agadaton, you have Halachic Midrashim, then you have Sefer HaZeir, which actually figures quite prominently in Halacha, that although it's in Kabbalah, but the Arizal is quoted frequently, the Zeir is quoted frequently. I mean, the Arizal is much later, but the Zeir is frequently quoted. And of course, the Mishnah, we're talking about Tanoim, the Braises. Excuse me, I just have to silence this to make sure we don't. Sorry, right now, you're all still seeing the PowerPoint, I imagine, hopefully. Yeah, so the Braises and the Tosefta is also from Tanoim. And then we have the Amoraim, Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi was finished before Talmud Bavli. I'm going through this quickly because you have this in the Rambam's Hakdoma, L'Mishnah Teira, which is a very broad historical overview of the Shtalshus HaHalacha. And then you have the Rabbani Savaroi and the Ge'enim. And then after that, so you have the three major Rishonim that were used by the Beis Yosef, by Rav Yosef Kari, for his Piskei Dinim. So he chose from all the Rishonim, the Riv, the Rambam, and the Rosh. And those are the three over here. So the Riv is basically around the same time as Rashi. So you have in the Sephardic countries, you had the Riv, and Ashkenazi the countries, you had the Rashi. And then the Riv had a student, the Rimigash. The Rimigash had a student, his name was Maimon, and Maimon had a son who was Rav Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam. And the Rambam mentions that there's a very small number of places that he disagrees with the Riv. He does on occasion disagree with the Riv, but in general, they go on the same kav. The Rosh was later than the Rambam. And you have the Rosh is very, very unique among the Rishonim, not absolutely unique, but certainly among these three, that the Rosh was from Ashkenaz, and as a result of the imprisonment of his teacher, the Marami Rottenberg, we'll talk about soon, and the fear that he would soon be imprisoned, so the Rosh ran away to Spain. And when he was in Spain, he met the Rashba, and he was appointed to a rabbinic position there with the help of the Rashba. So the Rosh is sort of uniquely situated to know all the minhagim in the Ashkenazic world and the minhagim in the Sephardic world at that time. So you have the Shita of Rashi and Tosfos, which are basically the Bnei Ashkenaz, and the Rosh, if you want to look at it that way, is sort of the end of the generation of the Baal Tosfos. Many Baal Tosfos, hundreds of years between the Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh, but nevertheless going in the same general kavs. And you look in the Rosh and the Rif are both pirushim on the Gemara. So you find in the back of the Gemara, in most places in the same type as the Gemara, the same typeset as the Rif. In the back of the Gemara, some of the newer Gemaras actually changed the font between the Rif himself and when he's quoting the Gemara, because he often quotes the Gemara word by word, and some of them make it easy to see what's from the Rif and what's from the Gemara. The Rosh is also Pirush on the Gemara, and he almost always quotes first the Rif word by word, and then adds on his own, and most often it's psukim from the Baal Tosfos that the Rif did not discuss. And the Rambam, of course, made a brand new codification. He was truly a legal code, because we have many Rishonim that comment on the Gemara and make it more difficult to extract what exactly the halacha is. The same subject might be discussed in various Gemaras. You look at Muktzah and how many Masechtas is it in, and many Inyanim in halacha are spread out throughout various Masechtas. And the Rambam put everything together and made his own Seder Mishnah Torah, which was one revolutionary thing which the Rambam did. He did not bring Makeres, which was very controversial, and we'll soon talk about that. What exactly was the controversy? Not about Moran Levuchim and the philosophical end of things, but even his Piskei Halachos, the way he did things were very controversial. And he also put in things which were also not Negeya Lizman Hazeh. So the Rosh had a son named Yankiv, so Rabbi Yaakov Baal HaTurim, so that's the Tur. So you have in the end of the Rosh and the Gemara, it'll have Piskei. Kitzur Piskei HaRosh was written by the Tur. So he took the bottom line of his father and wrote it down. What did he paskin? And then he put together the Seder that we have now of the 4 Chalakim Shulchan Aruch were really the Arba Turim. He split it up into Orchaim, Yeridea, Even Ezer, Cheshem Mishpat. That was done by the Tur. And he set up the same simanim that we have today that everybody uses, were all set up by the Tur. And Rabbi Yosef Karai, his main work was actually not the Shulchan Aruch. From his point of view, he writes about, should he make a pirush on the Rambam, or should he make a pirush on the Tur? Because the Rambam just brought one day, so he's going to have to write down all the different Rishonim. So he only has one day, whereas in the Baal HaTurim, he brings down various Rishonim. So although he most often paskins like his father, the Rosh, but he brings down what the Rambam says, he brings down what other Rishonim say as well. So the Beis Yosef was a pirush on the Tur, bringing all the background from the Gemara that people need in order to understand the source, where the halacha came from. And excuse me just one second, I need to turn this off. Sorry. And also opinions of other Rishonim that the Tur did not bring. And he wanted everybody to go over this every year, but it was much too long. And then he decided to write a kitzur of that, and that's the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch was never meant really to stand on its own, as we'll soon see from the words of the Mechaber himself. In any case, he also wrote a pirush on the Rambam, the Kesef Mishneh. And we'll discuss cases when there's differences in the psak between Kesef Mishneh and Beis Yosef. What is it that we do? The Ramah also wrote a pirush on the Tur called Darkei Mesha, and the Ramah, I believe, lived only to the age of 32. Extremely prolific writer, aside from the Darkei Mesha and his Psukim, Ramah Shulchan Aruch. He wrote many Sfarim, Kabbalah Sfarim, Teiras Ha'ela, which is a whole explanation of all the Prati Avedis in the Beis HaMikdash, according to Pshat, with the Midrashim, Alpi Kabbalah. We will say for Megillah Esther, many Sfarim that Ramah did in his short lifetime. And it's amazing to read his writings. The introductions of the Tur and of the Beis Yosef and the Darkei Mesha and the Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, very fascinating to read how they came about writing their Sfarim and why they decided to write it on as commentaries to what they did and why they wrote it in this fashion. But the Ramah wrote basically the same thing that the Beis Yosef did, and independently in Poland when the Beis Yosef was writing. And then before he published it, the Beis Yosef came out with it. So the Beis Yosef was this. He said, what am I going to do with this? So he just took the parts that the Beis Yosef didn't have. And that's why you have in the prints of many of the Shulchan Aruch that we have, you have the Darkei Mesha HaAruch, which is the original Darkei Mesha that he wrote. And then the Darkei Mesha that we have printed in the Torah, he took out everything the Beis Yosef wrote already, not to be repetitious. And then he decided, but you know what's missing? It's missing a kitzur of everything. So he started making a kitzur, just the final psak halacha from everything in the whole Torah. And then right as he was finishing, along came out the Shulchan Aruch, and Rabbi Yosef Kara did it again. And the whole thing came out over there. And he quotes, the Ramah quotes Esav, that you only have one bracha, my father. You couldn't leave me this, that should also have it. And then that he made the mappa, which eventually came out such a teva that Am Yisrael had one sefer, where the people kept the minhag Ashkenaz, the minhag Sfard. They still had one sefer to go by. So that's the basic overview. We'll go into some more detail later. And here you have just from the Tanakh and just some more detail, which Sfarim you can see more clearly over here. Mechilta, the halachic, and also other commentaries from Tanoim. On the first two Chamashim, the Sifra, you have in Sefer Vayikra, Sifri, and Bamidbar Dvarim, and then you have Midrashim going on the entire Tanakh. And of course, the Zayir is set up according to the Chamisha Chumshe Teva. Okay, so I'll stop here just for 1 second. Any questions or comments? Should have probably stopped earlier just to make sure everybody hears me. To make sure everybody's still there. You're all there?
Yes, you're good.
Good. Just want to make sure. Okay. Any questions, comments? We have a lot more to cover here, but we have to, make sure everybody's on board. Let's go further. So we're learning smicha, and how much is all of this relevant? So what I thought in teaching smicha, I'm teaching also Bosor B'Cholov too. So my main goal was, I learned smicha in 770, and really without any guidance. We just knew these chalakim. We had to learn treifas also. Then it was Bosor B'Cholov, Taruvas, Malich, and treifas, and we had to learn it. And the treifas was mamish then like a sefer Kabbalah. When would I never dreamt I'd be end up having to giving hashkachas and after hilchas treifas. But in any case, without guidance, what to learn? So you're supposed to learn Shulchan Aruch. So we opened up a Shulchan Aruch. We started reading. You have to learn Shachatas. Without an understanding behind it, so I realized that that it was really not a proper way to learn. Baruch Hashem. Later on, especially with the Shiur Montreal from Rabbi Shveil Vashalom, Rabbi Pendel Vashalom. So I'm trying to explain why it's important to learn things from the source, and to give some guidance in how to do that, and nevertheless be able to cover ground. So one of the things I'm mentioning, I don't know how important it is to you per se. I think it is important, but especially for Bachrim, that they spend so long learning Gemara Le'iyun. So the fact is, we learn in Chassidus about the union of learning the Yichud Nifla, and when you learn something Be'iyun that totally takes over your entire mind. But okay, you're learning Lishma, it's the Ritzeni Yisparech, Chachmasi Yisparech. But is there any Tam Nigla? Why are we learning Shorsh Nogach Esapara or whatever it happens to be? So it's very interesting. The first place to look, we hold, is a Shulchan Aruch. So you look in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it's very interesting, right? The beginning of Hilchos Talmud Torah. This is the quote from the Chazal that Rambam quotes. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Torah Bar Mitzvah, Torah Shebeksav, Torah Shebal Peh. This is the first parak Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Hilchos Talmud Torah, and this is Sif Vav. So previously, the Alter Rebbe spoke about the Chiyuv Talmud Torah, that you have to teach your child the entire Torah, all Tariag mitzvahs, with all of the laws, all the pratim, and the source for all of the laws, with all the pratim and pratim. So Rambam has all the halachas of Torah Shebal Peh, but it does not have the reasons behind them. And that, in fact, Alter Rebbe has a whole arichas about, because it's a basic machlekes between the Rambam and whether it's the Rosh or Rashi, slightly different shittas about, is it necessary to learn halachas b'taimein? Do you have to know the reason behind the halachas, or is it enough to know just the psak din? So in any case, the Alter Rebbe paskins that you are required to learn halachas b'taimein. I just mentioned that the Rebbe in the Sikha, the Mugadik Sikha, Chav Tevis and Chav Dal Tevis, that the Rebbe explained how it fits the union of Limud Rambam for the Chiyuv of Limud Kol Torah Kula, according to the Shita Alter Rebbe, that how Rambam could qualify also. Not by Shleimus, you have to learn it from the Makar with all the sources behind it, but nevertheless, the Rebbe's Matavich, the Shita Alter Rebbe with Limud Rambam. But that's a parenthetical statement. But previously, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the Chiyuv. You have to hire Malamed for your child and teach them the entire Torah Shebal Peh together with the reasons. However, the Alter Rebbe said, and now that's all written down the Torah Shebal Peh. So therefore, to learn the entire Torah Shebal Peh, if you didn't learn the whole thing in those days, then you had nothing. So you had to learn it and you had to remember it. Otherwise, you had no sefer to look back; it would be gone. Now it's written in a sefer, so therefore it's not required to do that. So what's the chiyuv today? Shilamdenu lahavin heitev b'talmud b'reiv hamakemes gam b'halachas v'sugyes hamukes. So the idea is learning how to learn that you have the ability to derive the halacha. Let's look a little further. So you have to learn Gemara, even the deep sugyas, imreiv haposkim b'rishenim b'achreinim, with the majority of the Rishonim and Achreinim, v'yamidenu al iyun halacha lemaisa, that you should be able to figure out from the Gemara the halacha lemaisa. And this is something that maybe today some of the yeshivas are doing it. I do know some yeshivas that are doing it, but in 770 we didn't do that. And the idea, and you see, we'll see later on, have some quotes over here from the Hakdoma Shulchan Aruch, from Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, about the importance of learning the Rosh and learning the basic reasons from the Gemara and how it's come down halacha lemaisa. So that the main inyan, according to Hilchos Talmud Torah, you have to learn Gemara le'iyun, because otherwise you're not going to be able to derive the halacha. You have to know how to derive the halacha. That's the ikir, that the enoch hanameh, that's yichud nifla, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, there's the chiyuv poshet mitzad yediyas hatera that you have to be able to learn Gemara and able to trace it back in order to understand the halacha. And what's going to be then? So even if you didn't learn the entire Torah Shebal Peh, but you learned those sugyas and you were able to learn the method of getting the halacha out of those sugyas, so then the child will grow up and now he has the ability to do it himself and be able to figure out what's the halacha l'maisa mitech iyun b'talmud poskim b'rishonim b'achreinim, that he should be able to learn from looking in the Gemara, follow it down through the Rishonim Achreinim, and then he'll be able to himself learn all the halacha Torah Shebal Peh. He has 120 years to do it. And you'll be able to learn all the details, and you'll know the reasoning behind it, and know the source for it. As if the Malamed taught you the whole thing. That's the basic idea what Limud Gemara is all about, according to what it says here in the Hilchos Talmud Torah. So obviously there are other dimensions of Limud Be'iyun. There's Bachlal al Pichsidis. I'll just say a few words over here, the way it is. Al Pichsidis, although I'm sure we're dealing with with the Anash, Chassidim, Sofrim. So there are a couple of Maimorim in Samach Vov that you have Avram Zokin, and you have those Maimorim. Chaisara told us about the inyan of limud biyigia and befrat limud halacha. The Rebbe spoke many times about this, the importance of learning halacha lamaisa, and that has to do with the whole inyan of dirab tachteinim, and it has to do with the inyan of elam hazeh becoming a place, making it a keli. It says when he plays a chassidus about the Rabbi Yehuda, it says that all of his learning was in Masechta Nezikin. Why is that? That through learning Masechta Nezikin, what's Nezikin? Nezikin, you're dealing with Sharnagach, you're dealing with damaging things, dangerous people, Ganovim, Gazlonim, that you have throughout. But through learning all of these inyanim of Hezek and negativity and Klippa, so what ends up happening, Rabbi Yehuda was Mavar these inyanim. It says many places in Chassidus that you have the inyan when you learn Eila Treifus. You learn Eila Treifus, Veila Ksheris, and you have the same thing in Bosor B'chalav, that this is kosher, this is not kosher. So you're Mavarer, the Natzutzes, you cannot directly, you can't eat Bosor B'chalav. How you Mavarer Bosor B'chalav? It's Iser Hanoah, Iser Babishul. Okay, when you learn the halachas, you're Mavarer these inyanim. All inyanim Alpi Chassidus, and the Rebbe quoted many times the Arizal, the Shtadlus that he had in learning halacha lamaisa, that when he went over things, that he went until he was sweating from the exertion that he put into it. Also, it's very important, and throughout the Rebbe Sichas, but especially the Sichas Non Aleph and Beis, the Rebbe spoke about the Mile and Neshamas Yisrael, and particularly regarding the Inyanim of Minhagim and Divrei Sofrim. Because many cases, the halachas we learn midrabanan, halachas midivrei seifrim, many of them are totally b'minig, dependent on the custom, and they're arguing about something, and the person might think at first glance, it's only a minig, it's a minig, so marash, it's only a minig. So what's pshat? Only a minig. So we'll soon see what the Rambam has to say about quote unquote only a minig, but the idea that Neshamas Yisrael have a higher source than Torah. So Adarabah, that we see. And the Rebbe said it all throughout the years. You have the famous sikh about Manashtana, why it is you start over a minig instead of Chametz and Matzah, which is Midiraisa, about the importance of Minhagi Yisrael. But later on, Nalef and Beis, and the Rebbe spoke about how the idea of the minig, Divrei Sofrim B'chlal, and even more so when talking about Minhagi Yisrael, that they come from the Neshamas Yisrael, and the Neshamas Yisrael have a higher sheirish even than Torah. So therefore, it's a bigger gili when it's coming with Divrei Seifrim. That's in Chamurim Malai Divrei Seifrim, and Arevim Malai Divrei Seifrim. The Maila Divrei Seifrim come from the Neshamas Yisrael even deeper than Torah. So therefore, when you see things which are midrabanan, and there's a machlekas apaskim, you say it's a minik, it's like this, it's like that. What's the difference? It's pes meruma shaleilim. So liktachanatzmus these inyanim, and we'll talk a little bit tonight in the Hakdoma also about the machlekas and where things come from, and so on. Good. Questions, comments? Al Schweigen. You're allowed to talk. The fact that it's being taped, it's not, if you want, I can take off your pictures. Maybe everybody's shy. I'll put back the PowerPoint in case people are too shy, don't want the pictures. Okay, so you can look at the Alter Rebbe, and you have over here the excerpt from the Alter Rebbe. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit of the Seder Aderes over here. For now, and there are a lot of pratim, but it's not important to remember all the pratim, just as sort of an overview and exposure in general to the many names. But as we learn them, I will endeavor to put them in perspective and how they fit into the global picture of things. Okay, so here you have the general Ishtalshlus halacha. Yeah, Matan Torah, then you have all the way down through the Zekanim, the Vim, Anshe Knesset Agdela, you have Tanoim, Amaroim, the Gemara, and all of them. So we have different, so they were Masak Anshe Knesset Agdela, Masak and Nusach HaTfilah. It's also important to note that many times we have phrase divrei Kabbalah being used in halacha conversations. When it says divrei Kabbalah, it doesn't mean Zaya and Kisvei Arizal. It's talking about things which come from Nach, and they have a special chumrah, things which have a pasuk. They trace their way back to a pasuk, often have the same status in halacha or similar status to something which is midiraisa. So we have a klal, for example, Sfeika deraisa l'chumra and Sfeika derabban l'kula. Something is midivrei Kabbalah from the Nevi'im, for example, or traces its way back to a pasuk, even if the pasuk is not a pasuk in Chumash, it will frequently go l'chumra. Pasuk will go l'chumra. The Alter Rebbe has a whole discussion about this in the Dinam Melech Mishnah and other places about what's the status. There's a whole discussion in general about an asmachta. You have a pasuk and it says, do we learn it from the pasuk? No, it's only an asmachta. What does it mean, only an asmachta? Is it merely a remes to help you remember, but the whole din is medivrei seifrim, or is it more than that? It's a famous ritva on the subject, but we don't really need to go into that now. Tanaim v'amaroim, so we have from the Mishnah, Bavli, Yerushalmi. This is not chronological. The Yerushalmi was redacted before the Bavli, so we know that the Mishnah was finalized by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Talmud Bavli. You have Ravina Ravashi. The whole discussion is, those that want to say there was a different Ravina. There's a Ravina at the times of Ravashi, and there was a Ravina many generations after Ravashi. The whole discussion is the letter from Rav Shira going. So there you have from the Gainim. So he wrote a whole history of Shtalshul Soterish Balpeh, and disagrees with the Rambam. Disagrees with him. The Rambam came later. Disagrees on many points. We have Midrashi Halacha, which are tracing back often the various halachas of Teresh Balpeh to the source in Teresh B'Ksav, never the Zayir as well. And starting the days of the Gainim, so then the Nusach HaTalmud, we have different things that were added by the Gainim, or it's debated whether they were added by the Gainim. We're going to have in Simon Pei Zayin, one of those, with a whole debate whether a section that's printed in all of our Gemaras was really from the Gemara or was added on later. Then they started the whole tradition that goes up till today of Shailos and Tshuvas. We have Tshuvas HaGainim, where they describe things happening in their days. And historically, it's actually very interesting because we have a better record of how people actually lived many years ago, because all the Tshuvas, you have descriptions of daily life questions. So they had to describe what was the situation in daily life. We even know how people spoke. In many cases, you look in Hilchas Agunis, in Eben Ezer, and often the testimony of the person that is giving edus, that somebody passed away, or that he recognized someone, you have to know, how did he recognize him? What signs did he recognize in the person? How well did he know the person? Where did he see the person? What time of day? How long was he sitting there? And so on. So often you have long sections, direct quotes in Yiddish. Some of it is not recognizable even as our Yiddish, but word for word transcripts really of what the people said and how they spoke when they gave their testimony. And so too, how people lived. There was a person once wrote I think it was a doctoral thesis in YU. He took the Shailos and Shuvas Masas Binyamin and reconstructed life in Poland from his Shailos and Shuvas. How did people live in their house, and what was going on in yeshivas, and what was going on in the marketplace, and what was going on in Besdin, and reconstructed the whole society from that. The reason I'm mentioning it, aside from the historical value, is that it's so extremely important to know all of the details when you're applying the halacha to a specific case. It's known that when electricity first came out, we'll just take the case of telephone. It's an amusing example. The first Rav that was asked about a telephone, using a telephone Shabbos, asked, well, what's a telephone? So explain, you speak on one side and the person far away can hear on the other side. He said, how does it work? So he said, well, you have one end, you speak in one side, and then there's a hollow tube that is going underground, and the sound of the person's voice goes underground through this empty hollow tube, and then it comes out the other end. So he wants to know whether it's Heitzah, is it carrying on Shabbos, that his voice is going out from his Rishus HaRabim and going all the way into somebody else's, his Rishus HaYochid, going to the other Rishus HaYochid through the street. Is it Heitzah? So he said, no. Okay, so telephones became mutter. That's not the way a telephone works. Okay, so you have to ask an accurate question and know all of the details. And so too, as we go through Bosor B'chalav, you will see how even one slight detail can flip the entire psak halacha and turn it from asur to mutter or vice versa. So we have from the Ge'inim, they also had the tefillas from the Ge'inim, and many of them organize individual halachas on different subjects. So this idea of having a commentary on the Gemara as opposed to piske halachas that we saw from the Rishonim, the Rif and the Rosh, and many other Rishonim, the Ramban primarily wrote Pirushim on the Gemara. They have the Rashba did both. The Rashba, in general, they have the Ramban, and he had a student, the Rashba, and the Rashba had a student, the Ritva. So the Rashba, Ramban also has certain halachas that he wrote, but primarily he's famous for his Chedushim al Shas. So the Rashba also wrote on the Shas. The Rashba also wrote many tshuvas, and the Rashba also wrote collections of halachas. In fact, Teres Abayis, which is on Issa V'Heter, is constantly quoted throughout Issa V'Heter, Yeridea, and the Beis Yosef, one place, writes about, was it really necessary for him to write, because the Rashba did all the work already, putting together all the Rishonim and arranging things in a halachic order. And he wrote thousands of shuvas, the Rashba, a very famous Sikha. The Rabbi spoke about the Rashba, Hatzlacha B'Zman, how did he manage to do everything that he did, that he gave many shiurim every day, and he wrote Shalos and Shuvas, and he was a doctor, and he took a walk every day. Hatzlacha B'Zman. And we have in the Rishonim, we have a similar division of the types of works, but just in general, you have the Rif and the Rambam, and roughly you would say Rashi is the same generation as the Rif, and the Rambam and Tosfos roughly correspond to each other. And we have the Rosh. They also wrote the Rosh. We also have Shalos and Shuvas from the Rosh. We have Shalos and Shuvas from the Rambam, from Rashi, and the other Rishonim. And some of them wrote Sifrei Halacha according to topics. So even the Rosh, you have Hilchas Chala that he put together, and many other halachas where people didn't know about the mezuzah, so they have to know. You have to look at Masechta Menachos to find out what does mezuzah have to do with Menachos exactly. So the person that was not so scholarly didn't know that was where to look. They wrote different sets of halachas and putting together from different places in different gemaras. But the one who had the hatzlacha, really for all generations, there were many, I don't want to say the word competing, but similar approach, works of similar approach that did not organize their sfarim. I'll say the Rashas. There were many that did that, and there were many that made koptzim of halacha. You see the Shachan Taza constantly quoting Shari Dura. There are many sfarim. We'll mention some of them soon. And they were also collections of halachas. Now, where do you draw the line between the Rishonim and Achreinim? So it's a whole debate. Some use Girush Svard, which was 1492. Others use the 1440, which is the year 4200. Years before that, others started with the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef himself is sort of the dividing line between. There's not a precise whole debate who's called the Rishon, who's called the Achron, and it's not as, just say another word here, that Tanoim and Amoraim. So in general, we have a rule that an Ameira cannot disagree with a Tan. So the Shaila, who says, where did that come from? Where does it say that the Tanoim can disagree with each other, and suddenly comes an Ameira, he was born too late, so his opinion is not worth anything more? Okay, so we say Rav Tanahu Palik, that even though the Rav and Shmuel are considered from the first of the Amoraim, but the Rav Tanahu Palik, he's considered like a Tana, and he can disagree. So the Gemara accepts when Rav disagrees with a Tana. But where exactly did that come from? So it seems, according to most commentaries, that was something which they themselves decided. So as we all know from the Rambam's Hakdoma to Mishnah Torah, that when is it that the possibility to make a psak din, a hachra, which is binding on Klal Yisrael or a gezerah or something of that nature, ended with Chasimas Hashas, with the end of the Talmud Bavli. Days of Ravina Ravashi, so then it was the end. After that, it was impossible halachically to make something binding on Klal Yisrael. Just to give a Pashut example, you have a Rav in a shul. The Rav in a shul wants to make up chak. He wants to make up policy. He makes up psak. You're not allowed to walk out during the rabbi's speech, whatever the case is. The rabbi is giving a sermon. You're not allowed to walk out. Okay, is that binding on the shul down the street? Absolutely not binding. Is it binding on the people in that shul? Well, if they hired him as Rabbi of the shul, so then B'pashta it is binding. Then he'll have to see how binding his contract is if the people don't agree with his policy, but that's another issue. You're only able to make a psak on the people that accepted your psak. So the closest really that we have after Chasimas Hashas, something that became accepted through Klal Yisrael, is Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom. So Rabbeinu Gershom himself put limitations about not having more than one wife and not divorcing a woman against her will. And that was something which was in a limited locale, but gradually spread not only through the whole Ashkenazic community, but in general through the Sephardic communities as well. And although there was a time limit placed on it, but it extended beyond that time limit and so on. But that was, again, all voluntary. The people decided that the Rabbeinu Gershom's cherem was a very important thing to keep and to not reverse. But the power to do things is dependent really on, if you want to put it this way, Kabbalah Sa'am, when the people, when you have Kol Chachmei Yisrael in one place, as you did in the days of the Mishnah, or you had in the big Talmudic academies and the days of the Talmud Bavli, so then they were the representatives of Klal Yisrael, and they had the ability to make conclusions in halacha that were binding on Klal Yisrael, but afterwards that no longer existed, and that's why we see so many different minhagim and different machlekes, and exactly where they came from we'll talk about soon. And then you have achreinim, so many categories of achreinim. You have the Shulchan Aruch, you have the Ramah, the Beis Yosef, Israelis, the Arizal and Kabbalah, all the Neisa Kelim. We'll have some pictures of the Tzura Sadaf in a moment, the Alter Rebbe, Shiur and Shuvas, up until the present day. And as I mentioned, as technology advances, the description of what exactly the Metzias is being mevader, exactly what it is you're talking about, is crucial to make sure you don't make a mistake when it comes to the halacha, because you have to know exactly what it is that is being discussed. Okay.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Please.
First of all, the Tikkun Nusach HaTalmud from the Gaonim, was that not referring to things from the censor?
That's not what it's referring to here. The censorship was another issue, and that was
that later, the censorship?
I'm not sure when I'm not really sure. I don't think in the days of Gaonim, I'm not sure how much censorship there was. They had in general in the days of the Gaonim, as the Rambam brings down, you had the inyan of comparable to a nasi. You had the rulers, Reish Kelusa, that were from Shevet Yehuda, and it seems they had a great deal of autonomy until it came to the end of the days of the Gaonim. The way it's described, I haven't seen descriptions of censorship then, but I'm not really an expert in that.
So it was more just that the Gemara itself was only just finished, and therefore there was different versions.
Yeah, that's also that. Yeah, but that's also mutal b'machlekes. According to Rabbi Shiragon, there was a lot of major editing going on in the days of the Gaonim, Rabbani Savaroy especially, and the Gaonim was going on for a while. As I mentioned, according to this opinion, that the Ravina was not in the generation of Rav Ashi at all, many generations later, and they were still working on finalizing the Nusach.
Okay, and the second thing, it sounded like you were going to say something like the whole idea that the Amoraim can't argue with the Tanaim maybe doesn't apply by Rishonim and Achronim. Is that? I'm not sure if I heard that correctly.
Yeah. Well, that itself is a debate. So, can you have, for example, a Rishon disagreeing with the Gemara? You don't have. I mean, you could have, for example, he's disagreeing with the Gemara because he has a medrash that goes like that. You have many places where you have that, but then it's Amoraim, Tanoim, Tanoim. Just it doesn't have to be the Gemara; it could be another source. But if without a source in Tanoim, let's say without a source in Ameda, a Rishon disagreeing with there's no Ameda saying like he does is something which is basically unheard of. But when it gets to the Achreinim, there's more wiggle room. So although there's this sort of unofficial agreement, but certainly among the Achreinim themselves, you see that we have disagreements and that you have a psak din in Shulchan Aruch, and although many times that I've once discussed the union of lighting menorah in the Beis HaKnesses, Persum and Nisa. So we don't see any such mocker in Shas. Where does the Gemara say you're allowed to make a bracha on a lighting in a Beis HaKnesses? Where did this come from? You want to light it to light, but a bracha, where's the chiyuv? Who's being yetzer with this? The Rabbi mentioned many of it's a tmiya, and also the tmiya for many of the mafarshim. Whatever it's a psak din in Shulchan Aruch, you make the bracha, azayit the mechaber gepasken, finished. That's what the psak din is, and there's nothing more to talk about. But you'll look at the Shach and Taz, and especially the Marshal, basically passed away at the same time as the Mechaber. I think the Mechaber, the Ramon, and Marshal passed away. All three of them within 2 or 3 years of each other. They all passed away at basically the same time. So the Marshal, how are you disagreeing with the Shulchan Aruch? So there's Shulchan Aruch, and this is the same generation. Once there's the Shaila about Zalman Shimon, he said something. I said, no, Chaim No says like this. So he said, Chaim No says like this. I was blown away. Chaim No. His forum that he wrote was Zalman Shimon, was more or less a Bendede. Okay, so it was not exactly, but it's not something that you can't disagree with. You have another mucker for. So we find a whole debate about whether an Achron, if you have no Rishon, does the Achron have a right? In general, the Rishonim are being mafarish the Gemara. I mean, this is an oversimplification, but just to put things in general terms, the job of the Rishonim, quote unquote, is they're being mafarish. What is it the Gemara is talking about? And making a seder between different Gemaras and being mafarish the Gemara. Where the Achreinim are more being masada the Rishonim than making new interpretations of the Gemara. But you do find times that they do that, and you do find, exceptions to the rule of Achreinim that will, say something, but they don't have really a Rishon for. You see, there's a number of places by the Alter Rebbe, but the Alter Rebbe, it's interesting. I mean, I never made I don't know if I can say a klal, but I've seen many cases where the Alter Rebbe is a completely different view of a Gemara than the Rishonim that we're familiar with. But then sometimes there's another Rishon that he found, or he puts it in the words of the Rishon. Like he learns different pshat than everybody else learns pshat in the Rishon. But it's really, it's a new Pirush in the Gemara, but he finds a way of relating it to the words of some of the Rishonim. Tzaddik pointed out in some places. But it's not as cut and dry a rule as we would like to think it is. So there are exceptions to it. That's why I started saying it and I cut short, because it's a little bit complex. And that itself is a debate. It's a debate among Rishonim how far they can go. It's a debate among the Achreinim how far they can go. Good questions. Any other questions? Okay, further. So this is a very complicated chart. So on the right hand, you'll all be tested on all these names. Just kidding. So on the right hand side, you have, this is all Rishonim basically. And you have on the right-hand side the Rishonim from Ashkenaz, and the left-hand side the Rishonim from Sfard. And you can see approximately how they correspond to each other. So Rabbeinu Gershom was an Ashkenaz, Rabbeinu Hananel, like also like the end of the Ge'enim, they call the Vora Divrei Kabbalah. It says Rabbeinu Hananel has special cheshivas when it comes to Psak. Then you have the Rish. The Rif, as I mentioned, was around the time of Rashi. And all of this gray area is all Balatesis. The Balatesis went on, as I mentioned, for quite a long period of time. So you have, the early, the Rashbam was also Rashi's grandson, and Rashi's other grandsons, and Rabbeinu Tam, the Yezakim. And all of these in general, the Smag and the Smak, all the different names that you've seen in one place or another, and you'll in Shulchan Aruch, you see them from different places. So let's go through just some general guidelines from the Sfadish Rishonim, so you get the idea. So as I mentioned, the Rif was a teacher of the Rimigash, who was a teacher's teacher of the Rambam. And then you had over here the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritva, as I mentioned before. And the Rosh is sort of in between, because the Rosh is over here and the Rosh is over here, because he ran away, because he ran from here to here and he went to Spain. And then he had the Rabbeinu Yerucham is also basically following the Shita of the Rosh. The Torah is certainly following the Shita of his father. So they're not really considered to be Rishonim Sfard, but just as the Rosh is not considered to be among Rishonim Sfard. Very often you'll have, your I don't want to say average because there's no klal, but extremely common occurrence is you'll see the Mechaber is passing like the Rif and the Rambam, and the Ramah is passing like the Rosh or the Balitesus. Very, very common occurrence. And the reason for that is there was always a machlekes, and the minhag became in the Sephardic countries to follow the Rif and the Rambam, and the Ashkenazic countries was to follow the Balitesus. So I'd like to suggest, just to keep things straight in your mind, to remember all of these names is very difficult, and I don't think really necessary, but certain names keep coming up again and again. And although Marami Rottenberg does not get quoted as often as many other Rishonim, I think it's important if you sort of use him as a central clearinghouse, so to speak, because he had very famous Talmidim. So the Rosh, as I mentioned, was his probably most famous Talmud. But the Mordechai, who's printed at the end of the Gemara and is very, very often brought down in the Poskim, was also a student of Marami Rottenberg. He also died al Kiddush Hashem, the Mordechai, with his family. And just mentioned the Shari Dura, who you see over here, right below the Rosh, was also the Tashbetz, but the Shari Dura is very, very often quoted. And then you have the Hagos Shari Dura that we'll discuss soon. The Hagos Shari Dura, which were footnotes on the Shari Dura. The Shari Dura was a sefer of halachas, organized by Tapik, and it was very influential. So when the Torah says something, and he's quoting the Rosh, and then we'll have other Rishonim or Achreinim who are quoting the Shari Dura. So the Shari Dura said, we have to worry about every sefer in the world. This is not the Shari Dura, the very, very important Yesod, and very often brought by the Shach and Taz. Hagos Maimonides also, when we have this reoccurring theme, just like you have the Gemara, so you have the Rif, and then you have the Rosh quotes the Rif, then he adds the Balitesus, the summary that they say La Halacha. Just agav, you're learning a Gemara, sometimes you don't have clear exactly what's the maskana of a tesis, La Halacha, you look in the Rosh and it'll say. But just like over there, you have it in the Gemara, and then you have it on the Torah. So you have the Ramah bring the Hagois, the Minhag Ashkenaz. So when you have the Rif, you had the Rosh updated it, so to speak, with or brought it into consonance with the Psukim in the Ashkenazic world with the Balitesis. On the Rambam, you have Hagos Maimonides. The Hagos Maimonides is also, he's bringing the Psukim and the Balitesis. Very often when they disagree with the Rambam, he was also a Talmud of Marami Rottenberg. So all of these four very often being quoted. The Sharidura, the Rosh, Mordechai, and Agos Maimonides. And as you see from the chart, there are others too, but they're very, very frequently, more frequently than others. And then we have later, you see on the bottom over there, Hagos Ashri. So can't talk about everybody, but I think also the Or Zarua is very, very frequently quoted. So the Or Zarua is right before the Maram Rothenberg. Maram Rothenberg was evidently Makabel from Or Zarua. And then you have many of the Hagois Ashri, Hagois from the Or Zarua on the Rosh. There's Marach Or Zarua, sometimes it'll say over there. So when you see in the Rosh, they have a little indented area in the Rosh printed in the back in the Gemara. That's Hagos Ashri. And almost always Piskei Halachas rather than Biurim on the Gemara. So I understand this is a complicated chart, and you don't have to know all of this. But sometimes you see Sefer HaTruma was Sefer HaTruma. So Sefer HaTruma is a very early Rishon. Is an earlier Rishon. So Balatesvus, you're going to say that Or Zarua was from the Balatesvus, Rabbeinu comes from Balatesvus. He was earlier, but nevertheless, they're all considered to be Balatesvus. So here you have some biographical information just on the Rif and the Rambam and the Rosh. I don't think we need actually to read this. I don't think we're going to gain too much from that. Anybody have a headache yet from all of these names? Let's finish with the names. And as I said, it's just sort of general exposure. And then when you learn and these names come up, so be able to identify. So here there has the Kuvas Achreim is printed over here.
Is there any halachic nafkamina who came first in the Rishonim? Is there ever a discussion about that?
Yeah, halacha kebasroi.
So it is
we're going to
important.
be talking just. I didn't give in the overview of today's shiur. I was speaking very, very briefly about it, but the Klali Apsak, the Rebbe spoke once about learning Klali Ashas in the end of Gemara Brachas. You have a whole section over there. I remember once by Fabrengen, the Rebbe spoke Hayitochen, and the people learning Gemara, they never even learned the Klalim over there, Klali Limud Ashas. How are they doing that? So you have Klali Aposkim. We're going to be talking about it in the second half of today's shiur. How do you know what to do when there's a machlekes? But it's a klal, halacha kebasroi. When is halacha kebasroi and basroi on all the generations? Oh, you should go to the shefet asher b'yemechem, and because he's basroi, but the basroi doesn't go only by tekufas and which tekufas. So yes, it's very often important. That's one reason it's important. The other reason it's important is to know who saw who. So the most famous example that we're familiar with is in the law of Arav Kablan by Mechiras Chometz. So the famous beer, the Alter Rebbe, why he added in the Arav Kablan to the Shtar Mechira, because the Gedalim who are Mater Mechiras Chometz never saw the Shita Mekabetzes, because the Shita Mekabetzes wasn't printed in their days. If they would have, and if they would have seen the Shita Mekabetzes, they would have passed it differently. So many times it's important not only to know who came first, but that the later ones see the writings of the one that came first. And that can completely turn around Psak Din. So for that reason, it's to know exactly when they lived is less important than to know who was before who and who saw who and so on and so forth. So that example that we know most famously from the din of Arav Kablan comes up constantly in the Pasuk.
Is there a single resource to know who saw who, or it's just something that has to be researched?
Yeah, I don't know. I imagine there are those that wrote and put it together, but it's also an unfinished work because there are always things that they're finding. Kisvayad, and they're printing a Nochais. They found the Meiri on the Masechta, and they found the Rashba, and every couple of years comes out something that they didn't have before. It was a bloy that was nifted of all the different Rishonim that he put together. Rebbe was machazik him very much. I mean, today you have things on computer, you have Eitzar Chochma, and you have Hebrew books and these things. It's easier to find things than it used to be, but things are dug up from places where they find things and they identify things. At Hayim, there are things still being mechadish. And it'll come a time, even now, you could have something. You have rabbinic journals, so you take something relatively new that came out. You have a convection oven, not a convection oven, with the what do you call it, with the magnets, induction. The induction stovetops. So there's a few nafkaminas in halacha why you might think it would be different from a regular stovetop, and then somebody finds, oh, there was a psak from the Pliny ben Pliny who brings some Makedis for it. And if you didn't know, then you might look and see what he says and change your mind. So it happens at Hayim. Yeah. Okay, so you have on the left-hand side, so you have after already the Ritva, you have the Ran. He was later. The Magid Mishnah, it's Pirush on the Rambam.
Is that Sfard again on the left?
Yeah, on the left is still in Spain there. So the Ran was also from Sfard. The Magid Mishnah basically did for the Rambam what the Beis Yosef did for the Tur, explaining Makedis for the Rambam, which is one of the Ravid's big complaints against the Rambam, that he didn't bring sources for what he wrote. So the Magid Mishnah did that, and then the Kesef Mishnah added on to that, and we don't have on every single sefer of the Rambam, we don't have, but you have the Ran wrote his sefer as a pirush on the Rif, and by the way, you have the Baal Amor wrote on the Rif, and then you have the Ramban, the Milchemes Hashem standing up for the Rif. It's very interesting that Ramban had this Shita, had a number of Svarim. So he wrote his criticism of the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvah. So the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs, he often criticizes the Bahag. When exactly the Bahag lived and who the Bahag was, certainly from the very early Rishonim. And when the Rambam says the Bahag, how could the Bahag say this? And the Rambam really, put it mildly, strongly disagrees with the Bahag. And along comes the Ramban and says, "Well, you're gonna push away the Bahag so easily? I'll tell you what the Bahag meant." So the Ramban does the same thing for the Rif. You have the Baal Amor criticizing the Rif. Along comes the Ramban, Milchemes Hashem, said of Milchemes, Baal Milchemes. The Ramban stands up for him. Anyway, you have the Ran, also from the Rishonim Sfard, and in Nemuki Yosef on the Sechtes, we don't have Ran, so we have Nemuki Yosef. Bosch was also from the Gedela Sfard. On the right-hand side, so this kavitz over here of Rishonim, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on, because maybe from all the names you had, the ones that I think are important to focus on, especially we pass on like the Ramah, in general, we go after the Yad Ramah, we go after the Ramah, and to see what the Ramah did and why he did it, these names over here that you see in this little circle over here, starting with the Maril. So this whole group over here, and I'll mention, maybe we'll, just to make it easier to remember, we'll just mention 4 names out of all this group here. Okay, that makes it a little bit easier over here. How many you have? You have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have 10. Okay, so I'll take half of them. So the Maril, basically what these Rishonim, these are the end of the Ashkenazic Rishonim. So when the Ramah wanted to bring in Darkei Moshe the Tur and Beis Yosef really up to date with what is Minhag Ashkenaz, and so too when it came to the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah wanted to be Kaveya, what is Minhag Ashkenaz? So who's Kaveya? What's Minhag Ashkenaz? So sometimes you'll go back to a Rabbeinu Tam or the Rosh or something like that. But the ones that really codified, quote unquote, what is Minhag Ashkenaz, is you have the Maril. So he was the first one. After him came the Marivs, the Marivail, and the Trumas Hadeshin. So the Trumas Hadeshin is also known as the Maroi. So it's easy to get confused, but the Trumas Hadeshin is known as the Maroi. He also wrote Hagoy Share Dura. You remember the Share Dura was a student of Maram Rottenberg, the same generation as the Rosh. So the Trumas Adeshin wrote Hagois on Sha'arei Dura. Okay, so we have plenty of Sforim on the page. What's so important about the Trumas Adeshin Hagois Sha'arei Dura? Because this is the end of Rishaina Ashkenaz, and he was Keveya, what is Minig Ashkenaz? And so to Marivail, and so to the Maril, and so to very, very often quoted over here on the right, the Isser Beheter HaOruch. So his identity is somewhat in debate. I have a copy of this Veheter. They reprinted it with a clear print. So what this Veheter, it's so often quoted, you have to look at it. And meanwhile, they wrote, who was written by Rabbi Yena Gerondi, was there a couple hundred years off, that Rabbeinu Yena. So it's not clear exactly who wrote this Veheter. But according to many, his name was Yena, but he was not that Rabbeinu Yena from the earlier Rishonim. That was not him. In any case, the Isser Veheter HaOruch gives many, many explanations of Minig Ashkenaz and how they understood the Gemara and how it applied to their Minig, and to be Keveya, what do Ashkenazim do Lamaisa? So you look at Minhagim Maril, it's chak, it's like a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. You do this, and you do that, and you do this, and you do that, very, very clear. So you see constantly the Ramah is quoting these last of the Rishonim. So the Maril, the Mariv, the Maroi, this Veheter is constantly being quoted by the Shach and the Taz and Mara and the Ramah and the Darkei Mesha. It's always bringing them these the end of Rishonim Ashkenaz. Trumas Adeshin, by the way, is the Shayos and Chuvas from the Maroi. It has that name because it has 354 Chuvas. Gematria Deshin. So that's how many chuvas are in it. So they say, the Shach says in a few places, that Trumas Adeshin, the Shailas were written by the Trumas Adeshin himself. You know, letters to the editor, and the people write them themselves. So the Trumas Adeshin wrote the Shailas. It's just a historical oddity. It means that you can learn from the Shaila itself. You can learn from the way. Why did he pick this case to speak about? From this itself, you can learn. Very famous discussion about this in the Dinim about the list of Chatchila and Teloim, smoothies and things like this. Very, very, you say this to Kinyonim, Halacha Lamaisa, that we learn out from these things. But the Marik is there too, but the Bartanura, we have a little bit of I use the word spillover, but we broke the world into two sections, Ashkenaz and Sfard. We have various in between. The Italian, the Rishonim were not exactly the same. Provence was sort of in between the two. So we're not going in a geography lesson over here. We'll just finish this page and then we'll take a break. So the Achreinim, as I mentioned before, where exactly you make the break between the Rishonim and Achreinim is itself a matter of discussion. But you can see right over here, these are all the Beis Yosef, Marami Prague, the Marshal, the Ramah, were all basically in the same time period. The Arizal, certainly, they were together in Sfas. Now, the Tesis Yomtiv was a student of Marami Prague, and his farm were also, he chose to write a Pirush, the Tesis Yomtiv, they wrote on the Mishnayos, and he also wrote a very, very important Pirush on the Rosh. You have Lechem Chamudes, Madonna Yomtiv, on many Masechtes, and he will bring down, if you don't have a tour, you go and you pick up a Rosh, and the Masechtes that have the Tesis Yomtiv on it, Madonna Yomtiv, and the Lechem Chamudes. So he's quoting over there from the Torah and then the Mechaber, and he's bringing down the Beis Yosef over there in discussions on the Rosh and the final halacha. From among these, so these names are coming up time and again. The Prisha was a student of Mashal, and the Levush was also around the same time. I have to say, a Maimar of Muzga. The impression I got, again, I learned Shulchan Aruch the first time around without any hadracha whatsoever. And I kept saying, why do they keep quoting the Marshal in the Levush? It almost seemed every time they quoted the Levush was to say the Allah is not like him, and they don't understand. Shach doesn't understand what the Levush said. Where did he get this from? The Levush's name was Mordechai Yafe, and he's extremely important for many reasons. The Levush wrote many Sfarim. He's called Bal HaLevushim, and each one, you have to hear Tachrich Boots, He named for all, his name was Mordechai, so he named all the Levusha Mordechai. He has a sefer, Levusha Mordechai. So he wrote many Sfarim, and his Sfarim on Shulchan Aruch. So you have Ateres Zov. The Ateres Zov is from the Levush. So Ateres Zov is on Yoreh Deah. So what did he do, the Levush? The Levush took the Mechaber Ramah, quoted their Piskei Halachas, and then gave a reason for it. Bekitzer. So it said that the Alter Rebbe, when he wrote a Shulchan Aruch, that he wanted to write a Shulchan Aruch together with the reasons, he styled the Shulchan Aruch al Seder Levush, not the Seder Levush, but the style of the Levush, that you bring the Piskei Halachas and you mashalev, you put in the middle of the halacha the tam, the reason behind the psak. So it reads like that. So often they'll disagree that that wasn't the reason, it's another reason, or something of the sort. But it looks like they're always disagreeing with the Levush, like why they're quoting the Levush the whole time. And the reason is because all the other places, the halacha is not like the Levush, and the explanation is like the Levush. When it's not, they say. Marshal is a different story, because the Marshal had a whole different shita. The Marshal, he asked before about the Achreinim, so the Marshal was one of those, so he's also borderline, so you can't really bring such a proof for him. So the Marshal wrote his Pirush basically on the Gemara. The Yamshar Shleim is on the Gemara. So it's halachas, but it's based on understanding the Gemara and working from there, the halachas. Whereas the other ones, the Beis of the Ramad, let's see what the Rashba says, and let's see what the Rif said, and let's see what the Rambam said, let's see what the Rosh said, let's see what they said, and let's try to put things together. Where the Marshal is going back to the Gemara, then he's working through the Rishonim and going back and bringing his own Pirushim. It was a very different way of learning, but it was very, very influential, the Marshal. And although, there are many times that the Nesa Kalim, Shachataz will, I won't say violently, but very vociferously disagree with Mashal. But many cases, you see that his reasoning is so strong that they're forced to bend their psak to the psak of the Mashal. Very often happens. The Prisha is also the Drisha. There's two Pirushim, the same person wrote on the Tur, and he's famous for that, but more famous for his Pirushim on Shulchan Aruch. So you have the Sefer Meiris Einayim, the Sma or the Smeh, that is also from the Baal of Prisha Badrisha. And then you have the Bach. There's also, you have the Bach saying things. The Bach is also very often brought, and disagreeing with the Bach. The Bach was from the Kaddish V'tar. We know the many psukim we have, our whole approach, but in the whole Elam HaChasidi, whole Chassidish world, about Chodosh, about whether to be Machmer and Mekel and Chodosh, Chutzlar is based on a psak of the Bach. The Bach was and the very often quoted Pirusha Bach brings Asius, the Asius Mamish of Pnimis HaTeira, very frequently quoted out. The Rebbe quotes him very often. The Rebbe quotes him very often. Biurim and things which are poshet. You see that he kocht and say the Satayra. The Levush wrote all Sefer Al Pisod, one of the famous Pirushim on the Rashi Al Atayra. The Rebbe is often quoting him. Taz also. Taz was the son-in-law of the Bach, and he often quotes Moreh V'Chamizal. He disagrees sometimes with his father-in-law. He also wrote a Pirush Divrei David on the Rashi Pshuta Shel Mikra. Rebbe often quotes. So the Shach was born before the Taz was born before the Shach. Taz was a Levi, the Shach was a Cain, and they often disagree with each other. And that went on later on, aside from the Shach and Taz, and then they had later on another round at it, printed in the back of the Shulchan Aruch. Magen Avram was a bit later, but also basically the same idea. We'll soon see who was on what sefer. And then we have many, many achreinim that too many to count, but some of the ones that are often brought in Yoreh Deah, you'll have the Crazy Placey, quote Al Seder Simonim, the Yavitz, Pri Megadim, of course, and many other achreinim. We have Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Now, when it comes to Bosor B'Chalav and Taruvas, so we don't have these sections of Shulchan Aruch from the Alter Rebbe, but we have many, many of the dinim discussed in Hilchos Pesach, in Taruvas, many in Hilchos Yom Tov as well, and we will be referring to the Psukim of the Alter Rebbe. From Tzemach Tzedek, you have in Piskei Dinim, you have a number of simonim, partial simonim of Hilchos Bosor B'Cholav. And I guess that's it for this section. We'll just finish. This is somebody made a fancy PowerPoint here for the Arba Chelka Shulchan Aruch. So in Rechaim, it's the same Taz we have on Rechaim and Yeridea, but we have more the Magen Avram on Rechaim, Shachan Taz and Yeridea. The Sma we have in Eben Ezer, also the Beis Shmuel. You have the Chelkas Mechekik, and you have Chesh Mishpat, the Shach as well over here, and also the Sma. Okay, so I think we shall stop over here. We're going to take a 10-minute break. So everybody does what they need, and we will, Mirz Hashem, come back 8:17 Montreal time. So we'll come back 8:27 Mirz Hashem. Any questions before we take a break? Okay, see you at 8:27. Resume the recording and let us proceed. So at the risk of oversimplification, so this is a possible way to help you get your bearings, to remember different mefarshim. So since we conveniently have 5 fingers and 4 spaces in between, so these key figures, and you help you remember, so you say, oh, so when was the Trumas Hadeshen? So, he's between the Torah and the Beis Yosef. Doesn't help you that much, but it helps you. I think it helps immensely. When was the Rosh, the Sharet Dura? It was in the Maram Rottenberg and the Torah. And when was the Or Zarua? He was an early one of the Balatesis. Is between the Rambam, the Maram Rottenberg, and so on. There's really between the Rif and the Rambam, aside from the Rimigash. I mean, we do have obviously Gedali Yisrael, but just a suggestion, a way to remember things. So there are a lot of words. I don't like slides with lots of words, but I don't know, maybe I'll be able to post this somewhere. But this is the introduction to the Beis Yosef, which is actually very fascinating. And he lists all these different Rishonim that he consulted. And just this last 3 lines here. All of them are basically quoting Shitas HaTesis. So if some places I don't quote all the Rishonim, again, the Rambam quotes many Rishonim. It's just when it comes to the Hachra, Allah Lamaisa, so he'll rely primarily on the 3 that he mentioned. But if he doesn't mention all the Rishonim, the one that hears me, in other words, reads the Beis Yosef, shouldn't suspect Hishani case of Das HaTesis, any tzarech of Das HaTesis Malolo. That they shouldn't think I don't know that they have an opinion, because they're included in the Divrei HaTesis. So I didn't mention everybody. But here he has the whole list of the various Rishonim. And then the first paragraph says that YSD decided to take the Shleishes Amudei Heira. And then what happens if they don't express their opinion? So if the 2 that are left agree, then it's one thing. But let's say one of them doesn't say, and the other 2 disagree. So then what happened here? Ramban, Varashpa, Varan, Vamordechai, Smags, Zal, Lefanenu. So they're still around, and we can use them in order to paskan the halacha. And here we have again. This is from Hakdoma to the Beis Yosef, and he wanted to bring down all the svaras, so everything should be there. So that's the first thing he did, was to collect the various opinions lahalacha. And then the final thing that he wanted, Teira achasu mishpatecha, the whole Am Yisrael should know Poshet what to do halacha lemaisa. And that's when he explains over here the 3 different Yesaidas that he used, and when it is he relied on others as well. And a very important thing he writes here at the end, that he was well aware that in the Ashkenazic countries, they had different minhag. So he says, this way, I'll give you the psak halacha, the way it comes out according to me. But if there are some countries where they are more strict about certain things, even though we say you can be lenient, they should keep their minhag. Because they already accepted upon themselves to behave according to those that are more strict. So they're not allowed to be mekel. Just I wrote in Shulchan Aruch, their whole lives they were saying it was prohibited. Let's say the Machaber Paskins you're allowed to eat rice on Pesach, and they didn't eat rice on Pesach. Now came out the Shulchan Aruch and say, oh, Mamash Machai, now we can eat rice on Pesach. He said, no, you can't. So minhag Ashkenaz was not like that. Whether that applies lahepach that Shulchan Aruch said l'chumra was l'kula is a whole other discussion. That was the Hakdoma to the Beis Yosef. Then why did he write the Shulchan Aruch at the end? That he wanted to have it very, very clear that kasher yishlu l'talmid chacham dvar halacha liyagam ba liyemer miyad v'yabarak lekol din sheyishlu alav halach l'maisa. So it should be a sikum bekitzer lamaisa, and we would like to do that in these shiurim also, that after all the discussion, shaklavataria, bottom line, what's the halacha? You're able to review. Now, the way he planned it, the Beis Yosef, that you should first learn the Beis Yosef, and you should understand what's going on, and then this was like flashcards, cliff notes, whatever you want to call it, lavdil, the way of remembering what is this sum total, the Yates of Pale that comes out of all discussion of Beis Yosef. But as we'll see, just to read the Shulchan Aruch and understand what it's saying is not really possible if you didn't learn the background. It's very easily to be understood. Zeis V'Eid, he had another reason also, that they should learn the whole Shulchan Aruch Bal Peh, the children. So they'll have all the basic halachas, they'll have everything clear from the time that they're small. Later on, they'll learn the reasons behind it. They'll understand better what it is that they were learning. And he says over here, where is it? Oh yeah, right over here, right, the yellow highlight ended a little bit too soon. That the whole Shulchan Aruch should be divided up into 30 sections, each day to learn 1/30 of the total, to go over everything you learned once a month, in order that you shouldn't forget it. And this is the Morashir, which was made by the Machaber. He himself made a Morashir, Yom B'Chedesh. But you look at, to us, this seems so utterly astounding. Like we're talking about 3 prakim a day Rambam. Look at this. Aleph B'Chedesh is 88 simanim Shulchan Aruch. So today was Vav. You're starting from Shinai and Gimel. You end the Hilchos Shabbos till Tav Samach Zayin. You learned almost the whole Hilchos Pesach. It seems to be huge. However, remember, this is without the Ramah. It's without the Nesek Kelim. It's without anything else. So I'm not saying that it's a Tzadavar Apashat, but this was actually in accordance, and it's something else which I wasn't planning on talking about today, talking about when we start the learning, but the idea of not forgetting what you learned, that the Alter Rebbe speaks about it at great length in Hilchos Talmud Torah, and we'll be speaking about some ways of doing that, a system of chazara, that you should be able to remember what it is that you learned. The Alter Rebbe also speaks about what a person could learn in 30 days, but we'll be speaking about that too. But you see the Beis Yosef built it into his Shulchan Aruch. Now the Ramah said, he addresses the issues of the Beis Yosef that many disagree, that who says you can just make a klal like that. The Marshal was very sharp against this. He says you have to go back to the Gemara and learn it yourself. You can just gonna accept somebody else just because they said it. You have to understand. If you're paskening a din, then you have to understand what's the reason and make sure that it applies to your case. Because if you don't understand the reasoning behind it, you might make a very big error and compare things when they really do not deserve comparison. And that's why, just a sort of a Maimon Muzkir here, but really it's a Dover Ikri, that although obviously we base our lives on the Shulchan Aruch, but many or most cases, that are questionable are not addressed directly in the Shulchan Aruch. It's slightly different. It's very similar. But the question is, just because it's similar, does that mean the din is the same? You know, a chaya is very much like a behema. So that means bas b'chol midiraisa or not? That means it's parted from kisi adam. And you say, okay, a chicken needs shchita and a cow also needs shchita. Okay, so therefore the same when it comes to bas b'chol, maybe. Well, you have to know the reasons behind things. Otherwise, you're going to make comparisons that don't really apply. And so to this klal that although he had many gedalis mane, the Beis Yosef that agreed with this shita to take these three rishenim and base the psak din on that, so Rama said, how can you make a klal like that? If the majority, he's calling them achreinim, that means the later rishenim. Okay, the Rama's beginning achreinim, that's not what he means by achreinim. By days in the spashtu besvarim harbe the bottom sheinim believe the ilchasa. Lefi devar achamim shemimei manu sheisim. The chachamim, the rishenim that we the bnei Ashkenaz paskin like. So he's giving dinim shulchan aruch that are not halachically true. They were always our guidelines. Behemor, Zorua, Bamordechai, Bashri is the Rosh, Basmag, Vagos Maiman. We're their descendants, and they're the ones that we've been following for hundreds of years, and that's the ones we're going to follow. Again, Reisi writes the last paragraph, das achreinim. Again, the achreinim are these rishenim. And very often, it's not only the rishenim that he just mentioned, the achreinim are the ones that, the Pashtus, he's referring to the Maril, and the Mariv, and the Trumas Hadesh, and the Maroi, and the Sveheter. So the Rama says, I'm going to point out that not everybody agrees with this Psaka Machaber, of B'chol Makom Sheyadaiti, Sheina Minik Dvarav, and he's going to write that this is the minig, and he's going to write it over there. So here's a basic guideline to the Shulchan Aruch. And I did want to mention that everybody should have a Shulchan Aruch, obviously, a Yeredeya. And the best one, really, I think, the most complete, if you're going to buy one volume, they have the whole Bosor B'cholav in one volume with the tour Beis Yosef, because I will be referring, I'll try as much as possible for copies on the screens that don't have, but it's very hard to read from a screen. I hope you're not looking at a phone, you're looking at a larger computer screen. But to be able to chazer over, especially Shabbos, to be able to chazer over the shiurim, chazer over what we learned, to have the Sfarim at hand. So here's the Tzuras Adaf of Shulchan Aruch. So you have the Taz on one side and the Shach on the other side. The Bar Heitev, very important. I'm going to show you a letter from the Mittler Rebbe about Bar Heitev, who most often is giving a kitzer of the Shach and Taz, Halacha Lamaisa. Often he'll bring down, there were different Maduras, the Bar Heitev, and he added later on from the Neidib Yehuda, and he adds from the Pri Chodesh, and different other important poskim. The Piskei Tshuva collected from Shaila and Tshuva Sfarim and arranged them al Seder Shulchan Aruch. Now, the more complete version of that was always the Darkei Tshuva from the Munkacher, who had a very extensive commentary of Shailas and Tshuvas on every sif of the Bosor B'cholav. And there's a more modern sefer I'll show you a picture of that brings that even more up to date afterwards. So you have the Shach and Taz, the most famous, but and again they had B'nai Deirim also that wrote commentaries. The Be'er Agela they don't show here on the page, but very essential if you want to know. And we'll soon see from the Mittler Rebbe and Alter Rebbe how important it is to know the source where things come from. So that's the Be'er Agela, tells you where it is. The Ein Mishpat in the Gemara tells you where to find that Gemara in Shulchan Aruch. And the Be'er Agela does the opposite, tells in Shulchan Aruch where it comes from, the Gemara, or if it didn't come from a Gemara, it's from a Rishon. We'll have in Pei Zayin, a whole Sefer Shulchan Aruch that is not from the Gemara, it's from a Rashba. I have a number of very common Shulchan Aruch that he's bring a whole Sefer from a Trumas Hadeshin, and so on. The Pri Megadim is commenting on it, usually on Shach and Taz. He also has very important Hakdomas to the Bosor B'cholav. He has a Hakdoma, the whole Shulchan Aruch, the Sveheter, and so on. Rabbi Akiva Eger wrote famous writing Shilos and Shuvas. In many cases, he's writing over here on the Shulchan Aruch or on the Nesikelim, Milkamat Anashach, and so on. Usually Bekitzer, the Dagul Mervava is also, this is just Mefarshim that are on the page. The Pri Megadim in the older Shulchan Aruch is printed in the back, the newer ones printed right on the same opposite to Shach and Taz. Dagul Mervava is also the Nedi Yehuda, and he wrote also Pirush on Shulchan Aruch. Okay, next section. I just wanted to give hopefully a bit of chayis in the whole concept of learning Shulchan Aruch together with the Makar. And although this syllabus, say that Alimudim is set up that a lot of ground is being covered, but nevertheless, whenever possible, you'll see in the Chayveres that they have the different sections I mentioned in the previous Dugma Shir. So they have a section called Lasuka Shmaitasa, which is bringing usually the Makar and the Mishnah and the Gemara, and later on a little bit the Hilchas, so when it's bringing it down to the Psak Din, Halacha L'Maisa, and very often contemporary cases and things of this sort. But it's not extra work to learn it from the Gemara. It makes it so much easier to learn it when you learn and you see what the source is. Often it's just a few lines, 1, 2, 3 lines of Gemara. You see that it's coming from, and then you can see how it is that the machlekes developed, where it came from. And you remember the line of the Gemara, and then you can see, oh, so this is the way you could learn it this way, you could learn it that way. So this is printed at the beginning of the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Chelek Aleph. So there's a Hakdoma from Bnei Machaber, and then you have a separate Hakdoma, Skamas Adonai Rebbe Arava Godlam Aforsim, from the Mittler Rebbe, Ben Agon Machaber. So I didn't quote the whole thing over here. And the first paragraph, we'll just summarize. I'm not going to read everything inside. We'll have Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, I'm sure. And he says that many times he heard from the Alter Rebbe that if he could, he would make sure that in every place where there's a nash, they should set up time to learn halachas b'tamein and to be baki b'hem, kol halacha tehei shagura b'fiyam. That everything should be clear. All the halachas should be clear. Midadabre mitzvah layla dia l'chol hana'arim apnuyim. Everybody that's sitting and they're learning in yeshiva, they're learning in Kalel, and they have the time to spend the whole day learning. What is the Seder? How are you supposed to learn? What did the Alter Rebbe establish? The Seder al-Limud, that you should understand all the halachas b'taimim. Now, the Mittler Rebbe is going to describe 3 different possible Sedarim. So one Seder is for, like he says over here, Hana'arim Apnuyim, those that have unlimited time for this. And then he has a second Seder for those that have less time. And then he has a third Seder for those that have hardly any time. Okay, you'll soon see how he defines those that Hatrudim B'Yeser that hardly have any time. So that definition also is a Musar Haskell, but he's going to give 3 different Sedarim. Whether we fit into either, this program is none of these 3 Sedarim. But nevertheless, I think it's crucial that you see the way the Alter Rebbe established and defines what's necessary to thoroughly understand halacha. So this is in a certain way being mashlim, what he said in Hilchos Talmud Torah in the Shulchan Aruch about the tachlis of what limud Torah that it should bring to knowing how to derive the halacha from the Gemara. So you see the Alter Rebbe walks you now through the process. And even if you're not going to be able to do that, certainly not for the entire Shulchan Aruch, unless you have the time to do so. But once you know the Seder, so you have halacha and you want to understand it more thoroughly, so then you look back into the source. And we'll soon explain what that has to do with learning according to Rabbi Sein and his team. Let's go. Seder number 1 for a person that has nothing else to do. If you have time to start from the Gemara and go through the Shenim Achreinim, you should learn as follows. You don't have to learn every Teisvis, but the Teisvis that have halachas that come out of it, and they're very clearly recognizable, learn those, the Gemara with the, obviously, Rashi and Teisvis. The main thing is the Rosh, to learn the Rosh. And go over the Piske Dinim, the Piske Din HaRosh, chazur them over. Then Hator B'lei Beis Yosef Kama Pamim. And this, I was also Kibalti Rabbi say, you want to start something and you want to get it clear. And I would say, even in this Seder, you will gain immensely by just reading through the Torah before you learn the Siman. And the more recently printed editions of the Torah even put the original Torah obviously didn't have the signs where it is a different Sefer Shulchan Aruch, but I'll say, oh, this is Aleph and this is Beis. Sometimes it's not in the Torah, you got it from somewhere else, it's in Beis Yosef, it'll have the Gimel in the Beis Yosef, wherever each place, but you just go through, it takes a very, very short period of time relatively, just to go through the Torah, and you'll see B'chlali, it opened the picture, in general, what is the Siman talking about, and what kind of Rishonim are there. Now, if you're learning in this Seder, then you learn the Torah without any Beis Yosef Kama Pamim many times. Learn the whole Siman with Beis Yosef 2 or 3 times. V'lachzor Kama Panim teku from miyad al Piska Shulchan Aruch v'Ramah. Sheb'chol Siman hayetzim mitecha Beis Yosef darkei Mesha. So then you get right away the tachlis of the Shulchan Aruch was originally that you should have in your hand clearly what's the bottom line after the Beis Yosef. Learn Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Bu'ian with the Kunshas Achron, and to chazur over Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Fine, and then till you're bucky with the Mara Mekamis that it has in the side. The Alter Rebbe also it's al derech the Beragela. You have in the old print of the Shulchan Aruch, who was much easier. The contemporary print is much more complete, in Arech, but it's sometimes difficult to find what's the main source and what's the secondary source, and he has every last source. It's an amazing job. But the old Shulchan Aruch, you have, this is a Gemara and this is a Rambam, and a very much more limited list of the Makayos. And you'll see what Alter Rebbe, what halachas he derived from the other Achrein. Okay, so that's Seder number 1. Seder number 2. You don't have so much time. Because you have to do some business. Okay, so this seems like a big job, but it's not such a big job. I mean, it's a lot to learn. To learn the Rosh. The Rosh is much longer than the Torah, but the Rosh is quoting the Gemaras. He's quoting the Rif, is quoting the Gemaras. The Rosh is quoting the Rif. And what happens if you don't understand the Gemara? You didn't learn the Gemara here in this Seder Alimut. So that's why you have Rashi on the Rif to help you understand what it is that it's talking about. So he says, so the Pirush Rashi is not a limit if in case you don't understand the Rosh, you never learned the Gemara, you don't remember the Gemara, so then you look in the Rif and you can see what the Rashi explains the Gemara. Go over the Rosh 2 or 3 times. Go straight to the Shulchan Aruch. And then straight to Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Because you'll have the source of the din with the reasoning behind it back in the Rosh, and then you trace it back to the Shulchan Aruch. And that's again so crucial. If you're learning Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, push it, do yourself a favor. Pick up a Mechaber. You'll see what the Mechaber said. You see what the Ramah said. And then the Alter Rebbe is a new Alter Rebbe. If you learned it like one of these 2 ways over here, then you see the Gadlus, the Reichheit of the Alter Rebbe is Ein Areich. And the understanding is also Ein Areich. Okay, but this also takes time. What happens if you have less time? They're extremely busy. They're very, very busy. What's Pshat? Very, very busy. They hardly have any time to learn. What's Pshat? They haven't have any time to learn. They only have 2 or 3 hours a day. Okay, no comment. But these are the Trudim Yesa. They only have 2 or 3 hours. What do they do? So then, look at the Alter Rebbe says. This is the Alter Rebbe told the Mitzvah Rebbe. Go back, at least learn the Mishnah. You have some time to learn some Mishnayos. Learn Perikol Bosor in Chum. Halachas harif akaponim levadi. So you're not learning the Rosh, so at least get the Rif. And just learn the Mechaber. The Shulchan Aruch HaKatzer is obviously not the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch was much later than the Mittel Rebbe. Piskei Shulchan Aruch HaKatzar is Mechaber. Learn at least the Mechaber. Get clear the Mechaber. Go over it many times. Kadesh Yeshena Halachas Kameshem B'Mekedem B'Lashon HaGemara Ad Psak Din B'Shulchan Aruch B'Chol Yom. So that way you have, if you have the Rif and you have the Shulchan Aruch, so therefore you have the beginning, you have the end. Okay, you don't have the everything in the middle, but you have to a certain extent the inyan. And you know at least some of the dinim with the Makedas. One more source on this, and this is a letter from the Mittel Rebbe. And he said that the whole idea that I have an obligation to tell people how it is they're supposed to be learning. So the second paragraph here, this is from the Igros. You have the first volume Igros, you have the Alter Rebbe, Mittel Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek, all the Igros together, one volumes. This is Yutes from the Mittel Rebbe, Tov Kuf Pei Gimel, they're not short here. So what is he saying to do? Listen what the Mittel Rebbe wants everybody to do, every single person. First, go through 2 or 3 simanim Shulchan Aruch every day. Learn Mechaber by Mechaber Ramav, obviously. Mechaber Ramav bar Heitev. At least go over it, do Chazar at least once. Okay. So at least you'll get the makar as it is in the Gemara. Very, very important. This is really quite amazing, and you see it from Alter Rebbe also, and you see here in the Mittel Rebbe that something which is scientifically verified. If you want to remember something, you Chazara and going over something bifnim is crucial to make sure that you understand the Chemra properly. But if you want to remember it, you have to say it over without looking at the Sefer. Say it outside. If you can say it outside, doesn't matter. You say in the Lashon HaMechaber, you say the Lashon HaShulchan Aruch. So the Lashenes is not as important. You can say over the Teichen what it says. So then, once you learn something, you can say it. I don't have time for Chazara. And when you're waiting online somewhere and you're walking in the street, you can Chazar over. What did I learn? What does it say? What was Sef Aleph? What was Sef Beis? And this way, you end up remembering. But came by Limud Shulchan Aruch. You should also say over what you learned in Shulchan Aruch. Say it over outside. It says, by the way, in the Revolf, by Greenglass, all of a sudden, it says in a Sefer that he was makabel how to learn a Maimer Bal Peh, that you learn a Shura, you learn 1 line or 2 lines, and you look away from the Sefer or close the Sefer and say it over outside. You look back to make sure you got it right, and you say it over outside. In the fancy language of the neuroscientists, this is called active recall, that you recall it from within yourself, and that makes it possible for you to remember later on. 2 or 3 pages a day. One tried to find which print he was talking about because it's different prints. How many halachas are on a page? And then he speaks other things. He wants you to learn smag and smak and drif, other things as well. And then he says these are people that are very, very busy. You learn a little bit of Rif, a little bit of Ran, a little bit of the Rosh, how much it is you learn. So there's more details over here. You say this stick a letter. I'll just mention outside just one letter I saw from the Alter Rebbe. I didn't have time to look for it. I believe it was the Alter Rebbe. It might have been the Mittel Rebbe. I believe it was the Alter Rebbe, and was one of the Gdele Hageinim of Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. And he was Tarul Parnasasi, and he had very little time to learn. And he asked the Alter Rebbe what he should be learning. Again, maybe it was the Mittel Rebbe, so I don't recall the Alter Rebbe, but as I recall, he said, concentrate on, again, the same thing. You have to have Shulchan Aruch, Bar Heitev, get some of the makar the way it is in Shas, whether it's from the Rif, you have more time to Rosh, and be able to have both the halachas and also the reasoning behind it. Okay, I can say one more word on this. that I said it would be talking about Rabbi Nasienu. So I think I might have mentioned by one of the Shiurim. I mentioned what I heard from Rabbi Isaac Olav Shalom, Rabbi Isaac Shvei, that he said that it's much more. I told the Maisa once, but I'll tell the Maisa again. Once when I was getting Shimashiv Rabbanus, a whole bunch of Dayanim in the car going to a factory, and they were talking among themselves. And one of the Dayanim from a big Hasidic group said, "You Lubavitchers have it easy." He says, "By us, we have to paskin a din, so we have to decide. We're going to paskin like Magen Avraham, we're going to paskin like the Taz, we're going to paskin like the Prima Godim, we're going to go to the crazy place. Who are we going to go like? We have a Pri Chodesh, we have a Mishnah Berurah, we have so many different svarim, we don't know what to do. You have the Alter Rebbe and finished. You go like Shulchan Aruch Harav, and you have no headaches." So Rabbi Isaac was a pikach. Nobody like him. But he said, it's absolutely the opposite. He says, so if you pass him like the Prima Godim, at least you did like the Prima Godim. You pass him like the Magen Avraham, at least you did like the Magen Avraham. You pass him like the Mishnah Berurah, you should like the Mishnah Berurah. He says, by us has to be according to Alter Rebbe. And most of the questions you get at the Alter Rebbe doesn't say explicitly what to do. It's based on something else. How did the Alter Rebbe learn Pshat in the Magen Avraham? Or go back further, how did the Alter Rebbe learn Pshat in the Beis Yosef? Or how did the Alter Rebbe learn Pshat in the Rambam? Or how did the Alter Rebbe learn Pshat in Rashi? How did the Alter Rebbe learn Pshat in the Gemara and the Mishnah? And according to that, the case that came before you is going to have to be interpreted according to the Alter Rebbe, the way the Alter Rebbe learned the Makeres. And then if you don't go through that and you get that wrong, it's as if you're a Tayeb B'Devar Mishnah, like you made a mistake in a Mishnah. Because since we pass like the Alter Rebbe, so then otherwise you're wrong. So he says it's much more difficult for us than it is for you. So that's something when you're learning Shulchan Aruch, how much to be able to do this is another question. But L'Shem Yediyah and Shleimus to understand how the halachic process works. And when you see a Machlekes HaPoskim, and how it is to relate to it, and how important it is, and how often that's going to be the only way you can find out. You'll find out what the din was based on, and you'll find out, of course, the Alter Rebbe speaks about it here, the Stamach Tzedek speaks about it there. Okay, before we go to the next section, any questions or comments? No? Okay. So this is, it's not going to take too long, but I mentioned before the Hakdoma, the Rambam, Mishnah Torah, but the Rambam also wrote a Hakdoma L'Pirush Mishnayos. Rambam very early in his life wrote a commentary on the Mishnah, and it's written in Arabic. It's very difficult. The translation into Lashon Kodesh is from Ibn Tibman is very, very awkward to read. It's difficult. So Kapach, the famous Chacham from Teman, retranslated into more readable Lashon Kodesh, so it's much easier to read today. But a very fundamental work for understanding halachic process is the Rambam's Hakdoma L'Pirush Mishnayos. So it's a Hakdoma, it says to say to Zroim. It's not really the Hakdoma to Zroim, it's a Hakdoma to the whole Mishnayos, and Be'emes, it's a Hakdoma to the entire Torah Shabbal Peh, up to and including Psak Halacha, to understand how it works. And there are a number of crucial factors that just going to minimize here. So I don't know how many of you are shluchim, how many are not shluchim, not exactly sure. I don't know, perhaps some of you, anybody ever taught the course Sign of the Cyberspace or Judaism Decoded from JLI, or took the course ever? Anybody? In any case, originally I wrote that course in order to explain the process of Torah Shabbal Peh, how we know it's true, and so on and so forth. But I've given it a number of times in yeshiva, and Poshet, the Bachrim said, how come nobody ever told us this? It's a whole, just to understand the very basics of halachic process. So it takes, really, you should learn the Hakdoma L'Pirush Mishnayos yourself. I'm just going to take out a few nakudas which I consider to be crucial. First of all, this is an Hilchos Ma'amarim. We all learn the Rambam over here, and the Rambam over here divides Torah Shabbal Peh into 3 different categories, and he traces each one back to words in the pasuk. So the Emes says in Hakdoma L'Pirush Mishnayos, he has 5 categories. Over here in Hilchos Ma'amarim, he has the 5, but he combines a few of them together. There are only 3. And there are 3 different categories in Torah Shabbal Peh, and they have different klalim. So over here, it's talking about the Hilchos Mamre in Perek Aleph. It's talking about a Zaken Mamre, and he's going against what the Sanhedrin says. And we have the whole din of a Zaken Mamre who rebels against the Sanhedrin. So what did he rebel against? So it applies. Echad means whether, right? So echad dvarim shalom doesam mipi hashmua ve'im teira shabal peh. Whether it's something that we learned that it was passed down teira shabal peh, meaning that it was passed down with the Maseda. Then when it says pri eitz hadar, it means a esrig. That's teira shabal peh. Okay, and he says no, pri eitz hadar means some other fruit. And so too, if the Sanhedrin says pri eitz hadar as a esrik, and the Zaken Mamre says no, it's a pear, whatever. He's Zaken Mamre. And so too, a second type of teira shabal peh he went against, that the Sanhedrin darshan something that the Moshe Rabbeinu was not told directly at Har Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu was told many dinim at Har Sinai, and he was given midah shateirin dreshus behen, and they darshaned out for a case that was not given over to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, using the midah shateirin dreshus behen. What does it mean? So it means that it was there behelim, it was there bekeach and potential, because you use the midah shateirin dreshus behen, you can figure it out yourself. And then the Sanhedrin would darshaned something. Let's say it was a kal v'chemer. So it said, okay, you're not allowed to do malach on Yom Tov. So you know, for that, you're not allowed to do malach on Yom Kippur. Let's say. Yom Kippur is more chomer than Yom Tov. So therefore, they didn't have to say what's the din. Just take an example. So they darshaned a kal v'chemer, and they said you can learn from this, even though, say, a case where it didn't say. Whatever one of the midah shateirin dreshus. It has a second category of teira shabal peh. Zaken Mamre goes against the Sanhedrin. One of the midas that they decided that this is the proper interpretation is Zaken Mamre. What's the third thing? Things which are midrabanan. They made a gzeira. That they found that now you needed to make a fence around the teira. So gzeiras are isurim derabanan. Takanas are mitzvahs, derabban, positive things to do. And minhagim also, minhagis also fit under the same category. And that's what's called in many places, that they understand. Rabbi brings down other places also, that a minig, according to the Rambam, ends up being midiraisi. He's going to trace all these back from psukim. Even though it's midrabanim, but they didn't. Who says the rabbanim? Who says a chama allowed to make a siyag l'teira? Who says they're able to make a minig binding on all the people? This itself isn't teira. Either any of these three categories of teira shabal peh, mitzvahs aseh lishmei alehem, va'ever al kol echem mehem, va'ever b'leis aseh. So you have to listen to all three, and if you go against any of the three, you're ever alav. So how do you aim it? And these are where you see in the psukim. Al pi teira shel yerucham. This is in Parsha Shoftim. In Parsha Shoftim, Pasuk Yud Aleph. So the al pi teira shel yerucham, it goes milamata l'mayla, if you want to call it like that. What's al pia shel yerucha elu and takanas v'gzeiros v'minhagas sheyeru b'hem l'rabim gedei l'chazek adas v'sakana elam. All the takanas. This is the rabbanon, divrei seifrim, and minhagim. That's a shel yerucha. They taught you this. The chachamim taught you this. V'al hamishpat shel yeimru, and according to the din that they told you, elu dvarim sheilmadu eisem min adin b'achas min midah shateirin dreshus behen, that they darshaned it out using the principles of Torah interpretation. And mikol adav asher yagid lachem, whatever they tell you is a kabbalah shekib leish mepish. That something was received straight down from Har Sinai. So I put this in English. So I called them received, derived, and legislated. The first category received. In other words, all we have to do is just not forget. We know pri eitz hadar. We have to remember the words pri eitz hadar. That's teira shabal. And then we have the explanation teira shabal peh, it's an esrik that we received. That's the one category. Then derived using the Yud Gimel Midas and so on, and then legislated, which are dinim midrabanan. So just a marshal to understand what it is. What did we receive? We received dinim, and we received principles, midas, to darshan out to learn. So we have certain dinim. Okay, so compared it with the ingredients and implements and tools. So you have wheat. Okay, then you have a rolling pin. Okay, so you have to put the two together. What are you going to do with the wheat? So it depends. You make it like this, it's a cookie. You make it like this, it's a matzah. You'll make it like this, it's a challah. It depends which tools you use. It depends how it is you mix it together. But the things we received. And that the Rambam says there's no argument about them. There never is a machlekes. There can't be a machlekes about them. That's Shittas Rambam. In many places, the Rebbe seems to go according to Shittas Rambam. There are other Rishonim disagree, but that's certainly the Derech HaMelech in understanding these inyanim, very Yisaidistic. And so those are things we received. There's no argument that there's such a thing as a Kal V'chemer. There's no argument that you have to eat matzah on Pesach. Okay, these are dinim. How you extrapolate from that, so that's derived. So that's the second category. What do we derive? So now, according to which principles are used and which dinim you're comparing it to, you might come up with a different conclusion. And that's where machlekes comes from. Machlekes does not come because we forgot. Machlekes comes according to the way, what kind of proofs are you bringing to the question that came to you? So you have to pick. Are you going to bring your proof from here? You're going to bring your proof from there. Okay, and then when you have a machlekes, so the two sides have to work it out to figure out what's going to be the conclusion. And then there are other cases which are legislated. They decided, okay, time came, we have to asa muktzeh. Whatever the case is, a gzeira midrabban, til shadayim, whatever it is. And there can be a machlekes about that too. Should you make this gzeira? Should you not make the gzeira? And therefore, the whole Gemara, anytime there's Chalukah Deis, we already know it's category 2 or 3. It's not category number 1. The Rambam says if it's in category number 1, there's no machlekes. Now the Gemara is not split up in such a way, not the Gemara, not the Shulchan Aruch, to know which things are which. But it's important to have this perspective. And that's why we know, is machlekes possible? So in the first category, no. But is machlekes possible? Machlekes is not a failure of the system. It's a showing that the system works. Now, when they come to Emek HaShaveh and they work it out, in many places, you have Mesachtidius, many places, you have the Shammai and Hill, and they argue with each other, and they bring their proofs back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth, and then one of them is made to the other. The Rambam explains that all the machlekes in the famous Shammai and Hill is not Shammai and Hill, it's Beis Shammai and Beis Hill, it's the Talmidim. Shammai and Hill, almost very few machlekes in. You have Shammai and Hill, because they always worked it out, and one was able to convince the other. But Beis Shammai and Beis Hill, the Rambam says the Nismatu al-Labaves, that it was Yeridas Haderes, and then they couldn't work it out. They couldn't come to a conclusion, so they ended up with a machlekes. There's a mimer from the Marash, I think it's Tafresh Lamed Beis, and he says there was a Miut Ha'er, there was a Yeridas Haderes from the days of Shammai to Beis Shammai, and because of the diminished Or Alaki, the Eir Alki was less in the world, so therefore Shammai and Hill were able to work it out. And Beis Shammai and Beis Hill, the Talmidim were not able to work it out. So therefore we have machlekes. And the same thing, when you have a machlekes, Shach and Taz, or any place you're going to have machlekes, anywhere in halacha, so they're going to have to bring proofs, and they're going to be using different proofs or making different interpretations, and it's all because these cases were not told to Moshe Rabbeinu Bar Sinai, and from the, if not the main principle of Torah derivation is svara. You have to give a sensible argument. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? So then you have, that's why when these klalim are used accurately, so then we say Elu be'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, that they're both emes. But what does that help you? You have to paskan halacha. So what do you do la halacha? So then we have klalim out of paskan halacha. So it used to be, you have over here in the Siman Reish Mem Beis, at the end of Siman Reish Mem Beis in Yeridea, you have Hilchos Talmud Torah there with Hilchos Malamdim. So we have from the Shach, Hanhagas Eiros Isivaheter. And the Shach gives you Klali Eiro. So you have the previous pages that has more from the Shach, and then at the end, Kitzer Banhagas Eiros Isivaheter, Makol Hashas Poskim, and from the Shach. So this is just the end of it. You have a few pages beforehand, and the many years ago was an accepted thing. You don't give somebody smicha until they're booking. Hanagas Hayros is a bet. You have to know Klali Apsak. How are you going to become a Rav? You don't Klali Apsak. Okay, so but after that, there's many others besides from the Shach that wrote about this. So you have a whole long section in Steichemet on Klali Ashas. You have many Sfarim, Klali Apsak. Many Sfarim which are written on the subject. I'm going to mention one over here, which is a, see, it's blown up a little bit, the Kitzer from the Shach. You see on the bottom, Chidushim Rabbi Akiva Eiger. This is a recent sefer that came out. So I mentioned before Darkei Tshuva. Darkei Tshuva was the sefer to learn with the Yeredeya, that if you wanted to know halacha l'maisa, I can just tell you the Seder Alimud we had over there from the Mittler Rebbe. I can tell you once what the Rabbi Zikshoi told me. I said, if you want to know halacha l'maisa, what do you learn? So he said, learn at least the Torah. At least the Torah. If you can't be Yosef, he said, but I said, Achreinim, meaning he's talking about Achreinim. What to learn? He said, learn the Shulchan Aruch, Chaber, Mar Ramah, Bar Heitev, Darkei Tshuva. Okay, which it sounds like, okay, Shach and Taz is two svarim. Darkei Tshuva is only one sefer, but it's Ein Areich, because Darkei Tshuva is long, very long Darkei Tshuva, because it brings basically all the shaylos and tshuvas that ever spoke about this din. So you want to halacha l'maisa, you have to have practical cases. And all of these shaylos and tshuvas today took into account the Shach and the Taz and the Pri Magodim and the Pri Chodesh and the Kiva Eger and the Neidi Behuda and the Chasam Sefer, or the Chasam Sefer himself is quoted there, and all the Mefarshim are quoted over there. And then you had a Rav who had the Paskin Din, and you wrote a tshuva about it. So you look in these tshuvas, and very often you'll find Darkei Tshuva quotes Samach Tzedek. There's Samach Tzedek talks about it. So the Darkei Tshuva used to be the sefer of choice for that. There's a sefer out now. I'm not saying that it displaces Darkei Tshuva. The fact is, all of these malaktim, there are mistakes in it. And Darkei Tshuva was known that the Munkatcher himself, was the overseer of the project, but the Talmidim and Yeshiva, the ones that put it together. So it's a klal that's before all the Sifra Klalim, is that the reason the reference is there is for you to look it up yourself. Before, you're not allowed to rely on these kitzurim to paskin dinim for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that they're often not accurate. You have to look it up in the original sefer. So there's what the Darkei Tshuva did for Yeredeya. So there were many Sforim that did it, but there was nobody that did it in such a comprehensive way as the Darkei Tshuva until recently. There's a sefer Piskei Tshuvos. Piskei Tshuvos. He's from today's poskim, Meretz Yisrael, who did an Aveda Gedela B'Yeser on Orach Chaim, and it is the sefer. You want to know what the din is by an alarm and putting on a light to get into your house, and it goes in automatically. All the modern day shaylos they put together, all shaylos and shuvas. I'll say that are Shulchan Aruch. He follows mainly Mishnah Berurah, but Mishnah Berurah is following the Seder Shulchan Aruch, and he brings down the Alter Rebbe and brings down the Rebbe anytime that there's brings down all poskim, Sfardim, Ashkenazim. It's an amazing work. And that was on Orach Chaim. It's almost finished. He has one chelik left. Then, but in Yeredeya didn't have. Then his son-in-law, this is his son-in-law, he wrote something called Psokim Atshuvas, and he started the same thing in Yeredeya. So the one on the page over here, this is from Simon the Reish Mem to Reish Samach Vav. He also wrote on Issa V'Heter, so he has on Bosor B'Cholav, Melicha, Bosor B'Cholav, Taruvas, and also further on for the Bishalakum and the Pasakum, and so on, later on Yeredeya too. I highly recommend getting the Sefer, although as all Sifra Klolim, you have to look up what it says, because not everything is 100% Meduyik, but that's the rule, that things are not 100% Meduyik. But in this, he has two volumes on Yeredeya. One of them, as I mentioned, was from Yeredeya Aleph, basically, Yeredeya Aleph and base. And this he has from Reish Mem till Reish Samach Vav. So it goes through this, Elchas Dake, Elchas Mila, Kibbud Aveim, very exceptional collection of shaylos and shuvas, a Kibbud Aveim, very negaya to people that have elderly parents, the Maimar Musgar. But he has over there a Kuntrus Klolei Apsak. So here, this is going through later, so he'll quote Achreinim that are bringing Derech Agav that so Steichemed did. Steichemed, I don't know the history of the Steichemed, but he was a Sfarad Sharav that ended up in Russia basically, and had to come to know what are these Ashkenazim, what are they doing? And then you had the amazing collection of Sfarim, and he borrowed Sfarim, and he put together, so the Rebbe Rashab had his Sfarim printed, that's why it's printed on the Kahas. But all the different Svarim that later on gave different klalim. So this is a modern, a contemporary collection of klalei psak, which has the mitzvah of being after the other ones. You'll find a lot of things that are collected. Now, obviously, he's not the shach and he doesn't think he's the shach, but on the other hand, he lived later and he saw other people, other poskim that said different things. What does it mean? Yesh Eimrim was in Yesh Misha Eimer. When do you say Allah Gabasroi? And so on and so forth. So this is very useful to have, I believe, for those of you that have Eitzara Chachma. Right now, I think since the beginning of COVID, I think Eitzara Chachma, they made free online. So you could always look it up if you want. You can't print it, but you could look it up. Psokim B'tshuva is very useful sefer and has Klolei Psak. So we have over here on the left, you have from Rabbi Farkas from Yerushalayim, wrote Klolei Poskim B'Hirov from the Alter Rebbe. So it's not comprehensive because the Alter Rebbe didn't write a sefer of Klolim. It's just Derech Hagav, he'll give a klal of psak in the middle of Kunshas Achron, in the middle of Tshuva, in the middle of even the Pnim. He'll express a certain klal in psak, and Rabbi Farkas did a very, very important work going through all of the works of the Alter Rebbe and arranging it. This is all the Klolei Psak, Klolei Rambam, and Klolei Aravid, and Klolei Mechaber, and Klolei Ramah, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't cover every case like these other Sforim do, because it's only the Alter Rebbe. But wherever the Alter Rebbe spoke about it, it's very important sefer. Another sefer I just wanted to mention that it's often obvious where it is the Alter Rebbe speaks about things, and there is a Mafteach of Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the newer edition that has Siman by Siman. So you're learning Siman Tzadik Beis. You can look and see what the Alter Rebbe speaks about Siman Tzadik Beis. But there's a sefer Piskei Admor Azaken, Hilchos Issa V'Heter. So this edition that I have, the Sharblat, was from, you can see Shva Meis Chamishim V'Sheish L'Bria. There's Tavshin Nun Vav. It came out 12 years later, Tavshin Samach Ches, and they completed it. Then it was Siman Samach up to the end of Bosor B'Chalev, and now it's the newer edition is complete up to the end of Taruvas. So it's not just a list of psakim in the Alter Rebbe, but it explains this is what the Shach says, and this is what the Taz says, and this is what the Prima Godim says, and this is what the Yad Yehuda says, and so on and so forth. Different Achreinim were discussing it, and here you see this is what the Alter Rebbe holds, and you see, and then you can get the psak din for any particular case when you want to know, because people always ask when there's a machlekes Shach and Taz. What's the rule? What are you supposed to do? So the rule is there's no rule. You'll see sometimes Alter Rebbe paskin like a shach, sometimes like a taz, and there are many, many achreinim you have to take into account. So there are klolei psak, but we're fortunate that we have the Alter Rebbe, we have a Tzemach Tzedek, and they are in the cases where they are discussing the topic that you're learning. They are sort of the center, and everything revolves around them. But that's not a seder a limit to learn like that. You learn the seder Shulchan Aruch, you learn the Nesa Kelim, and so on. So we have 10 minutes left. So I'll stop now for some questions, comments. Everybody with me? I'm talking the whole time. I should check every once in a while and make a poll to make sure everybody's still there. Okay, people nodding their heads. Good to see. Chabad the beaches. I hope you're going to take it off. I'm going to see a picture of the beach. Floor is open for questions. Oh, yes, you got real people behind these masks. Okay, very good. Shalom Aleichem. Taka, can everybody just take off? Just I get to meet everybody. So I'll go over here. You're not Bela Goodman, I'm sure. You're not. You don't look like a Bela. What's your first name? It says Goodman over there. What's your first name? Eli. Oh, okay. You're even without saying. Menachem. Where are you? Can you unmute yourself?
Which Menachem?
Huh? Eli Goodman. Where are you from?
I'm in Long Beach, New York.
Long Beach, New York. Long Island.
That's it. That's it.
Okay, there you go. Good. Menachem and Druzy, where are you?
Manchester, Vermont.
Manchester, Vermont. Okay. Shalom Aleichem. I had to get a very, very expensive COVID test this week in Vermont.
Oh,
Yeah, Meisha writes this. Oh, even to save the trouble. Where are you?
Cliff Lake, New Jersey.
Okay, so it's Taka telling the truth. Okay, good. Rabbi Vogel, you are Pittsburgh, right?
Correct.
Got you. Menachem Friedman, I have to remember now. You're California or Toronto?
California.
California. California?
Yeah.
Desert.
Palm Desert.
Palm Desert. Palm Desert. Okay. Rabbi Myers.
In Boston, Massachusetts.
Boston, Mass. Okay, very good. Meisha Whitkiss is also Palm Desert?
Desert, yeah.
Palm Desert. Okay, good. Ozzy Belson. Shalom Aleichem. Where are you?
I'm from Chicago.
Chicago, Illinois. Very good. And B. Steinmetz. What's B for?
Benjamin Steinmetz, Thornhill, Ontario.
Thornhill, Ontario. Okay, good. I should have remembered.
A
that.
Landsman.
Yeah, you're a landsman, but where's your chaver? Not here tonight. Okay, good. And J. Rubin. J stands for
Yeshua,
Sure. Okay, very good. You were where?
West Hartford, Connecticut.
Well, Hartford. I should remember. Okay, there's Rabbi Lisman from Baltimore. Shalom Aleichem. Okay, Schechter. What's the first name? Or this is okay. Shai Garari. They said, you know, when they first had the mice with the Mendel Wächter, when the Chaim Baruch first made the telephones and they had the online chassidus on the line, so the chaver from Williamsburg used to call up and tie up all the lines, so nobody could call in. So he had to go over there before he figured out automatic system. What is it? Hello, hello, and hang up the phone because they tied up the line. So everybody should get a busy signal. You have to go hello, hello. But here we have unlimited lines, so it's nicht so gefährlich. Okay, Eric Denenbaum. Calling Eric Denenbaum. Okay, who did I miss? Shai Guerreri? Yeah, where are you?
Still in Crown Heights.
Crown Heights? Crown Heights is also a place for Jews. Okay, good. Anybody I miss? Okay, fine. So let's the last couple of minutes over here. I'm not going to really go into it, but just mention ideas behind halacha l'maisa. Is not going to help you that much, but just to give an idea what the different klolim. So klal Shulchan Aruch, you have a stam v'yeshemer halacha kastam. So sometimes the mechaber will say yeshemrim this and yeshemrim that. So that means basically they're shakel, even though one has to come before the other, but something has to come before the other. You can't say like the Eberster, Zacher v'shomer, shomer v'zacher v'dibarechot. So, but if he says one without saying yeshemrim, he says stam. The halacha is like this. Yeshemrim different than the halacha is like the stam. But the Stechemet says tel lechatchila should be cheshesh to the yeshemrim, because if the halacha is like the stam, then why do you bring the yeshemrim b'chal? So the Stechemet said lechatchila you have to worry about. And the Kaf HaChaim said b'shas adchak you can be mekel when there's a machlekes when he brings it down. Yeshemrim v'yesh misha emer halacha karabim. The difference in yeshemrim and yesh misha emer. Yesh misha emer. What do? And we're gonna have Bosor b'chalav that it just says yesh misha emer. Without a stam and a yesh mishem. Now without a yeshem, yesh mishem. So yesh mishem, no yesh mishem. So you have to worry about it. You're talking shemuskam makulim. That maybe that we only have one yesh mishem that said it, but that doesn't mean anybody disagrees with it. Then what do you do when there's a stira between what it says Shulchan Aruch and Beis Yosef? Because the Shulchan Aruch is supposed to be the kitzur of Beis Yosef. So what happens when he says something different? You have even in Beis Yosef, you have a bedek abayis where the Beis Yosef added later on. So Allah like Shulchan Aruch, it comes later. If you have a stira between Shulchan Aruch Kesef Mishnah, like the Shulchan Aruch. Then we have klalim in the Ramah. So one klal, when he doesn't write anything, that means he agrees with the Shulchan Aruch. Now there are cases where he doesn't write anything because he already disagreed before and he doesn't have to write it every single halacha, but that's a different story. Sometimes he'll write the din. And they're wondering why doesn't it say if it's a different opinion? The Mechaber says it din, and he's bringing Mechaber says it's mutter, and he brings that it's usher. So he should say yeshemrim it's usher because he already brought an opinion. What if he just says it's usher? So what's pshat? He learned different pshat in Mechaber. Or what does it mean? No, sometimes he doesn't write yeshemrim. He means to say yeshemrim, but he doesn't always write it. The Rabbanim saying Yochid b'makom hefsed meruba. So normally Yochid v'rabim halacha karabim, but if a din the Rabbanim, the Ramah holds hefsed meruba, you can rely on a Yochid. And you'll see many times when there's apparently unresolvable machlekes and the Neisakalim, Meshach, and the Taz, and they can't come to a conclusion, or the Prima Godim, and they'll say, okay, the Hefsed Meruba will do it that way. Yeshemrim, that means he holds like them. V'yesh machmirim, neitel lematirim. In other words, he brings down a yesh machmirim. You should know there's a yesh machmirim, but I'm not so 100% convinced there, right? I'm more. He's not saying clearly that he paskins like that when the Rambam says yesh negim or yesh linekach or something like that. Became niru laheres, then it's a hachra. He's making up psak. Became the royal laheres. That's you should. So he's netel ladaitam, but it doesn't have the same strength as kain niru laheres. And if there's a contradiction between what the Ramah writes in Shulchan Aruch and what he wrote in Darkei Moshe on the tour. So again, just like it was by the Machaber and the Beis Yosef, you go like the later one, which is the Psukim the Shulchan Aruch. And here we have general rules, which each one has many different ramifications. And you can look in any of the Sfarim we mentioned previously. We'll have a whole arichas. Many of them you have in Encyclopedia Talmidus, a whole arichas when it applies, when it doesn't apply. So you have a klal. Some of the famous klali, psak, yochid b'rabim, halacha karabim, the asre derav, halacha karav. That not we say yochid b'rabim, but not every individual Pesach has the same stature. So if you have somebody, the number counts, but also the level of chachma counts. And b'deraisa in general, so in general, you have a machlekes rishonim. When we have a din midrabban, you say sveka deraisa l'chumra, sveka derabban l'kula. So this itself, these dinim themselves are midaraisa midrabban, a whole discussion. But b'chal, it's a toys. People think that the rabbanim is what the chachamim made it up, and that's it. Be'etzim, all dinim derabban are dinim deraisa, as we learned before from the Rambam, because we have psukim and chumash that you have to listen to the chachamim. So that's the way the Rambam explains. How can you say Asher Gitrom Mitzvah Zivono Amikra Megillah? Amikra Megillah, because Megillah is Mitzvah Rabbanim. So Asher Gitrom Zivono, what kind of Zivono? He commanded us to listen to the Chachamim. And the Chachamim commanded us to read the Megillah. The Rambam brings the mashal of Lichbenschen. Fine. Can we create a WhatsApp to share this info, please? Okay, which info? The info we learned in the Shiur? Or will this be written up somewhere? Yeah, in my forthcoming Sefer, which has been like 30 years in the process. I don't really have this written up. But it is recorded for posterity on Zoom. Okay, the screenshot you took is everybody's picture? Looking at the chat.
No, no picture, just a screenshot of the klalim, the last slide. Your picture is there.
Oh, okay, fine. Can we create a WhatsApp to share this info? So the thing is, I do once it comes more masudar, I want to make a WhatsApp group. In the meantime, I think I'm going to communicate with email. It's just for a couple of reasons. It's just easier. I'm afraid I'm going to miss WhatsApps. So I guess you all found out about this shiur tonight through email. So in the meantime, I'll do it this way. And some of these slides are mine. Some of the slides belong to Avineni. They were made by the Israeli counterpart. And so about sharing them, I'm not sure whether Avineni says about sharing the PowerPoints. I have no problem sharing my PowerPoints, but I have to ask. Okay. Yeah. So does everybody use WhatsApp?
Yeah, we just want to be able to communicate between us when we want to discuss things outside of the Zoom.
Yeah, I don't mind the WhatsApp, but one of the reasons also is there was some that didn't have WhatsApp. So if everybody had WhatsApp, it would be one thing, but then you
I
to-
have a group I just made right now, just for, it's not for you to control, you don't have to worry about it, just for us to be able to share and discuss.
I tell you the truth, if it's a WhatsApp group, I want to be able to control it. Then someone's going to get carried away. Who knows? What kind of psukim could come out. Okay, so I will post over here in the chat my email address and cell phone number. You can add me to that group, but I unfortunately cannot guarantee at this point that I'm going to follow everything, but I will try, but can't guarantee. So this is my email address and cell phone number. And if my habit is I don't answer phone calls from different area codes unless I have in my contacts. So if I have your phone numbers, I can put your phone numbers in my contacts, and I'll have it. But otherwise, if I would answer phone calls, used to be people didn't give out their cell phone numbers, but once you go in a WhatsApp group, everybody has your phone number. So if I answered calls from out of the area code, I would just be on the phone the whole day. So, but if you call my number and you leave a message, then I get my messages. So that's really the only foolproof way of reaching me is by phone and voicemail, old-fashioned voicemail, because I give my email address, I try to look at those, but the WhatsApp's sometimes difficult. Did I post this? What just happened now? Did my, how come my type message here? There you go. Okay. Fine. Okay, gentlemen. How does this 2.5 hour thing work for you? Anybody's having brain freeze?
It definitely helped to have that 10-minute in the middle.
I think maybe it would be good to have, better to have 2 5-minute breaks. Okay, we'll see as we go along. That's okay, Rabbi Sai, so we'll see you. Afreilichem Purim. On Purim, Meshusham Purim, Yerushalayim, Mirakedesh, some Mashiach Tzidkenu. And then we'll have the week afterwards, after the Shiva Simei Mishta, then we'll have the Wednesday afterwards next year. Okay, just one last thing before I go. So somebody asked in the last class in terms of time to do it. So I spoke with them what they usually do in the Seder Havineni, and what they normally tell people is like this, that you have the Shiur. So in the Chaveres, so let's say for the next Shiur, so you all should have received the PDF. So it's one page, it's just Mechaber Amav, Sif Aleph through Dalet, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4.5 pages. Okay, so we will, Amir Hashem, cover that. I might switch around a little bit because of the Ramah, and I might put something in its place, but basically it's 4.5 pages of Chemer, and that's what we're going to cover. So you should definitely go over that. The sooner you go over that, the better you will be, better off you'll be. You know, you should print it out, and if you want to add notes, things that I'll be adding to what's not in the Chaveres, so then, especially Shabbos, you should chazer it over and to go over it. If you have time to prepare beforehand, so then it'll be, even if you just skim through the material, just skim through the Torah, just read the Mechaber Amah, even if you don't understand everything that it says over there, you don't know what it's talking about. Nevertheless, I think there's a Teyalis, but Din Kedima probably is a Chazara more than the preparation. Okay, gentlemen, have a good evening.
Also, the Freilichen Purim.
Freilichen Purim, sei gesund. Call to.
Thank you.